Welcome to Moonlit Alpha, a supernatural pack saga where fate is messy, the sparks are wild, and the full moon brings more than fur and fangs. There is snark, steam, and a mate bond, neither of them asked for, but cannot escape. Buckle up, pack. From haunted hearts to ancient curses, you will find stories here that pull you in and do not let go. If you are into tales that twist the real and the unreal, you are in the right place. TM Nyxen Audiobooks. To my subscribers and listeners, your ears give these stories their second life. You are the reason these stories live beyond the page. Hit that subscribe button and let us dive in. The Ashford Lodge had stood for 300 years at the edge of the northern timberline, and in that time it had seen every kind of wolf. It had seen alphas who ruled through fear, their packs pressed thin and trembling behind them like shadows behind a flame. It had seen councils dissolve into snarling matches before the first toast was poured. It had seen blood on the ceremonial floor, old alliances shatter over a single wrong word, and young challengers carried out through the back passage so the gathering could continue without the inconvenience of a body cooling in the main hall. The lodge had seen all of it, but there was one thing the lodge had never seen until 12 years ago, when a 23-year-old alpha walked through its carved oak doors for the first time, and every conversation in the room died within 10 seconds of his arrival. Not because he was the largest wolf present, though he was. Not because his pack stood behind him like a wall of controlled violence, though they did. It was because of what moved beneath his skin. Tonight, the fires in the great hall burned low and amber, the way the hosting pack preferred them, warm enough to suggest welcome, dim enough to hide expression. Long tables ran the length of the room, dressed in dark wood and iron candelabras. 37 alphas had sent representation to this gathering. 11 had come themselves. Onyx was one of the 11. He stood near the north wall with a glass of something dark red he had not touched, listening to a conversation he had no interest in, watching the room with the particular stillness that said Pack had learned to read the way other people read. When Onyx went still like that, shoulders relaxed, jaw easy, eyes moving slow and deliberate across a space, it did not mean he was at rest, it meant he was counting. The Richmont territory dispute will come up before the third hour, said the wolf to his left, Seal, his second. A broad-shouldered man with close-cropped gray at his temples, despite being barely 40, who had stood at Onyx's right hand for 9 years, and earned the distinction of being one of perhaps 4 people alive who speak to the alpha without measuring the distance to the nearest exit first. Harkon's going to push for arbitration. He will want you as the neutral party. I know. You are not neutral. I know that too. Sale's mouth curved slightly. You going to tell him that? Eventually. Across the hall, 3 alphas from the eastern corridor were watching Onyx with the particular brand of attention that tried very hard to look like something else. He would notice them when he walked in. He noticed everything when he walked in. It was not arrogance, it was architecture, the way his mind constructed a room the moment he entered it, filing exits, alliances, grudges, and hunger into clean separate columns before he would take in his second step. The Eastern alphas had no grievance with the Obsidian pack. Their interest was simpler than that. It was the same interest that followed him into every gathering, every council meeting, every room where wolves gathered in numbers large enough to generate the particular low-frequency tension that came from too much dominance pressed into too small a space. They were watching to see if it would happen. It always came down to that, eventually. The incident that made Onyx legendary among the packs had not been a battle, though he had won enough of those. It had not been a challenge, though he had answered every one put to him with the kind of efficiency that discouraged repetition. It had been a training field. 12 years ago, at the first regional gathering Onyx attended as a newly appointed alpha, the hosting pack had organized a sparring demonstration in the open yard behind the lodge, a tradition meant to show strength and, more practically, to give young wolves somewhere to put their energy before the formal negotiations began. It was ceremonial, like contact, a kind of controlled performance that looked impressive and meant very little. Onyx had stood at the fence watching it with the polite attention of a man who had somewhere else to be, when one of the hosting pack's younger wolves, barely 19, still growing into his frame, trying to prove Something in front of 30 gathered packs, decided that the new alpha from the north with the quiet eyes and the unreadable face was the ideal target for the kind of showing off that young wolves confused with courage. The boy had come at him fast, the way young wolves always did when they wanted to impress. Shoulder dropped, weight forward. Committed before his brain finished the decision. What happened next lasted less than 4 seconds. Onyx did not move till the last possible moment, and when he did, it was not violent. It was almost gentle, the kind of redirection that spoke of someone who had stopped needing to prove for some years ago. He stepped inside the boy's momentum, caught him at the shoulder and the wrist, and used his own speed against him, turning the charge into a controlled drop that put the young wolf flat on his back in the dirt, without a single strike thrown. It should have ended there. But the boy had landed hard, winded and embarrassed in front of every alpha at the gathering, and in that half second before thought catches up with instinct, he looked up from the ground and snarled, the raw, unguarded snarl of a wolf whose pride had been strict in public, and reached up and grabbed Onyx's forearm with both hands digging in, trying to pull him down. And then every wolf on that field went silent, because the veins in Onyx's forearm lit up, not the flush of exertion, not the ordinary map of blood beneath pale skin. Something else entirely, a deep burning gold that traveled from his wrist to the inside of his elbow like fire moving through glass, bright enough to be visible through his shirt sleeve where it had written up, vivid enough that the nearest wolves took a step back before they would consciously decided. The boy on the ground released him immediately, scrambling backward through the dirt, with an expression that had gone from humiliated to terrified in the span of a single heartbeat. Onyx looked down at his own arm. The gold was already fading, pulling back like a tide retreating, dimming from bright amber to deep bronze to nothing, leaving only his ordinary skin behind. His expression had not changed at all. That was the part wolves would talk about afterward, the part that turned an unusual incident into something that followed him for the next decade. Not the light in his veins, extraordinary as it was, but the fact that his face during those 4 seconds had been as composed as a man checking the time. He would crouched down and offered the boy a hand up. The boy had taken it shakily, said nothing. Neither had Onyx. But 30 packs had been watching, and 30 packs had seen gold burning through the veins of an alpha, who moved like violence held in careful hands. And by the time the gathering's first formal dinner was served that evening, the story had already taken on the particular velocity of something that people could not stop turning over in their mouths. That had been gold. The color of dominance pushed close to its edge. The color that meant his wolf had surfaced, not broken free, not even close, but risen, the way deep water rises when something large moves beneath it. Every wolf at every gathering since had heard the stories. Most had never seen it themselves. The ones who had seen it carried the experience with them, the way people carried near-miss accidents, with a sharpened understanding of how quickly the ordinary world could tip into something else entirely. "He is watching you again," Seal said quietly, nodding almost imperceptibly toward the eastern wall. "I know, Kieran's alpha. He is young, wants a reputation. He can want one. I'm saying he might try to build it at your expense tonight." Onyx turned his head just far enough to look at the wolf in question. Mid-30s, heavy through the chest, with the particular restless energy of a dominant wolf who had not found his ceiling yet and was testing every surface he could reach. Their eyes met across the hall for exactly 2 seconds before the other alpha looked away, not quickly enough to be a submission, just quickly enough to be smart. Onyx returned his attention to the room. "He will not," he said. Seal considered this. "What makes you certain?" "Because Davin was in the eastern corridor 3 years ago when the veins went red." A pause. "Ah," said Seal. Red had only happened twice. Gold was dominant, the wolf close to the surface, the power leaning forward without releasing. Silver came rarely, a color that older wolves associated with the kind of cold, absolute authority that made a room quiet the way a drop in temperature made a room quiet, not threatening exactly, but undeniable. Red was different. Red was the color that appeared when Onyx's wolf was not leaning forward but pushing, when something had crossed a line clear enough that the animal beneath the man stopped being patient about it. It had happened the first time when a neighboring alpha had threatened a member of his pack directly, young female, barely 18, standing at a market exchange with no backup, and the story of what Onyx had done in the subsequent meeting had been told so many times it had acquired the weight of mythology. The second time had been in the eastern corridor. He did not discuss either incident. He did not need to. The wolves who had been present discussed them for him. That was, Onyx had come to understand the particular utility of a reputation like his. It did not require maintenance. It required only the occasional reminder that it was earned. The gathering's formal opening was called to order by the hosting alpha, a measured man named Aldrich, silver-haired and deliberate, who had been hosting these regional summits for 20 years and had developed the particular skill of making everyone feel equally accommodated while ensuring his own pack's interests were quietly, efficiently protected. Onyx respected him for it. The assembled wolves took their seats at the long tables. Business would come later, the territory disputes, the boundary negotiations, the careful maneuvering of alliances that needed tending, the way fires needed tending, regularly and with attention to what you were burning. For now, there was food and formal greeting, and the performance of civility that wolves put on for gatherings, because civility, however thin, was more efficient than the alternative. Onyx sat at the northern end of the primary table, as protocol dictated for the highest-ranked alpha present. It was a distinction he neither sought nor avoided. It was simply accurate. Seal sat to his right. Two other members of his inner circle, Ren and Dax, sat farther down, present, watchful, carrying the quiet readiness of wolves who had been with Onyx long enough to understand that gatherings were not safe, simply because they were formal. The conversation around him flowed and bent and it doubled back on itself, way conversations at these gatherings always did, full of implications that lived in the spaces between words, full of questions that were not asked directly, because direct questions in rooms like this carried the weight of accusations. Onyx listened to most of it without speaking, and when he did speak, it was in the short, undecorated sentences that other alphas had learned to pay close attention to, because brevity in Onyx was not disinterest. It was precision. It was near the end of the second hour, when the food had been cleared, and the first careful allusions to the Ridgemont matter were beginning to surface in the conversation at Eldrick's end of the table, that the moment happened, not a challenge, not an incident. Something smaller and in some ways more telling, a younger wolf, one of Curran's second circle, not even an alpha, just a mid-ranking dominant, who had been drinking since the first hour and had developed the loosened judgment that came with it, leaned across the table toward the wolf seated across from him and said loudly enough to carry that the matter of the Obsidian Pack's northern expansion was going to come up whether anyone liked it or not, and that some people in this hall were carrying more territory than they could hold without help they had not asked for yet. The table went quiet, and the way tables go quiet when something has been said that everyone wishes had not been said. Onyx set down his glass. He did not look at the wolf who had spoken. He did not need to. He simply set the glass down on the dark wood with a quiet final sound, and in the half-second of silence that followed, the wolves nearest to him, the ones close enough to see, watched something move beneath the skin of his right hand. Not gold. Not yet. A pale, deep silver, traveling in a slow, deliberate line from the back of his knuckles to his wrist, and stopping there, as if thought itself had interrupted it. 3 wolves at the immediate table saw it. 3 wolves went very still. The young mid-rank wolf at the other end, the one who had been speaking, looked up, caught the expressions of the 3 wolves nearest Onyx, followed their gaze, and stopped talking mid-sentence, in the manner of someone who has just understood something important about the room they are standing in. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then Aldrich, with the 20 years of experience that made him good at his job, smoothly redirected the conversation toward the Ridgemont matter, as though the previous comment had never been made. The gathering continued, but the 3 wolves who had seen the silver kept their eyes on the northern end. The table for the rest of the evening, with the particular quiet attention of people who understood that they were in the presence of something that did not need to announce itself. It never did. Later, when the formal session had broken into smaller conversations, and the hall had taken on the looser, lower-voiced character of an evening winding toward its close, Sia leaned close to Onyx's ear. Silver, she said simply. Yes, the kid's lucky it stopped there. Onyx's gaze moved to the far end of the hall, where the mid-rank wolf who had spoken was very carefully not looking in his direction. He is young, Onyx said. He will learn the shape of this room eventually. Seal was quiet for a moment. Or he will say something else stupid tomorrow, he offered. The corner of Onyx's mouth moved, not quite a smile. Something in the neighborhood of one. Then he will learn faster, he said. Outside, beyond the lodge's heavy doors, the northern timberline stood black against a sky thick with stars, the kind of sky that exists only at altitude, only in places where human light has not reached far enough to drown it. Somewhere in the tree line a wolf was running, one of the hosting pack's sentries, moving the boundary in the easy, ground-eating lope that wolves defaulted to when they had distance to cover, and no urgency pushing them. Onyx could hear it. He always could, the rhythm of another wolf's movement, the particular compression of sound that living bodies made, moving through dark spaces. He stood at the tall window and listened. Tomorrow, the real business of the gathering would begin. The Ridgemont dispute, the boundary questions, the careful, exhausting work of keeping 30 packs from tearing each other apart. Over the lines they would drawn in ground that had no idea it was contested. He was good at that work. He was built for it, his father had told him once, not because he was the most powerful wolf in any given room, though the question of that was rarely simple, but because he was the most patient, because he could hold the wolf and sight him still and quiet while the world pushed at him, and the world understood, somewhere below the level of language, that a thing which can be pushed without moving is a thing to be careful of. The sentry in the tree line reached the corner of the property, turned, footfalls fading. The stars held their positions. Onyx finished what was left in his glass, tasted nothing, and returned his attention to the room. He had no particular expectation for what the next day would bring. He was about to be wrong about that in ways that would take months to fully understand. The wolves smelled her before they saw her. That was the thing no one would talk about afterward, not directly, not in the way you talked about territory disputes or bloodline politics. But it was true, and every wolf present knew it was true, and the knowing sat in the room like a stone dropped in. Still water, sending rings outward that no one could stop and no one could explain. She came in through the side entrance, not the main doors, which were ceremonial and heavy, and opened inward, with the kind of deliberate weight that announced arrivals, the way they were meant to be announced at a gathering like this, with presence, with intention, with the clear understanding that you knew where you were and why. The side entrance was a narrower door off the eastern corridor, used by staff and by wolves who knew the lodge well enough to move through it informally. She used it because she had been told it was closer to the guest accommodations, and she was carrying a bag, and the woman at the front desk had pointed her in that direction with the distracted efficiency of someone managing too many arrivals at once. She had no idea the eastern corridor ran directly alongside the Great Hall. She had no idea the Great Hall had 37 packs worth of wolves in it. She pushed through the side door, bag over one shoulder, a folded document in her other hand that she was trying to read while she walked, a set of directions to a research consultation she was here to attend, something to do with ecological territory mapping and land use documentation that the lodge's administrative office had arranged, and she walked approximately 6 steps into the eastern corridor before she stopped, because the corridor had a long interior window, and through that window was the Great Hall, and in the Great Hall, every head had turned. Her name was Freya Callahan. She was 28 years old. She worked in environmental land assessment, which meant she spent most of her professional life in the field, measuring, documenting, writing reports that were read by bureaucrats who had never stood in the kind of landscape she stood in and had no framework for what it felt like when land had weight to it, when a place had history pressed so deep into its soil that you could feel it through the soles of your boots. She had come to Ashford Lodge because a colleague had forwarded her a contract, boundary assessment work, land use history, the kind of documentation that old private estates needed periodically for legal and conservation purposes, and the pay had been good, and the location had been listed as a northern timberline property, which was exactly the kind of work she was best suited for, and she had not asked many questions, because the contract had been straightforward and She had needed something straightforward after a year that had been neither. She had driven 4 hours through mountain roads to get here. She had arrived in the late evening because her route had taken her through a road closure that was not on any map she owned. She was tired. She was not prepared for any of this. Through the long interior windows she could see the hall clearly, the firelight, the long tables, the assembled wolves in their human forms, the kind of gathering that looked, on the surface, like any formal dinner held in any grand old lodge in any remote stretch of forested uplands, except that every person in that hall had stopped what they were doing. 37 representations of 37 packs, mid-conversation, mid-drink, mid-negotiation, and every single one of them had oriented in the same direction, the way animals orient when something has triggered a sense they cannot ignore. Toward her, Freya stood at the window for a moment, Earl still, with the particular uncertainty of someone who has walked into a room, or near a room, and understood immediately that she had misread the situation in a way she cannot yet quantify. Then a woman in kitchen staff clothing came briskly around the corner and took her firmly by the elbow. "Guest accommodations are upstairs," the woman said with a tight, careful smile, someone communicating urgency through professional pleasantness. "Let me take you up." "I was upstairs," the woman said again. "I will bring you a tray." Freya allowed herself to be redirected because she was tired and she was hungry, and something about the quality of that through the glass eye contact had made her chest feel strange in a way she could not name, and she thought, going up the stairs with the staff member moving her along with efficient purpose, that she must have interrupted something important. She was right about that. She had no idea how right. In the great hall, the silence stretched for 3 full seconds after the eastern corridor door swung shut behind her. Then Thiel, who had a particular quality of second-in-command who has learned to manage the space between incidents, reached for the wine carafe with a deliberate, normalizing motion, and said to the wolf nearest him, "As I was saying, the Richmond Northern line has been contested since," and the hall collectively wreathed. Conversation resumed. Not immediately at its prior volume, not with its prior ease, but it resumed, the way water resumes its level after a stone has been dropped in it, finding the surface again by instinct. Wolves turned back to their companions. The alpha from the eastern corridor said something to his second that made the second nod. Aldrich at the center of the head table made a quiet remark to the wolf beside him that no one else heard. The ordinary resumed, but not completely, because there were things the ordinary could not account for, things that moved beneath the surface of that resumed conversation, the way currents move, beneath the river's face, invisible and continuous, and very much present. The first thing was scent. Every wolf in the hall had caught it when the eastern door opened, a scent that did not belong to any pack, did not carry the marker of any known bloodline, and carried something else beneath the absence of those expected things, something layered and unclassifiable that hit differently, depending on the wolf doing the catching. To the older wolves, it pulled at something archaic and deep, something that lived below instinct in the place where racial memory kept its oldest information. To the younger wolves, it registered as wrongness at first, an intruder, an outsider, something unidentified, and then, a half-second later, corrected itself into something else entirely, something that was not a threat, but was something, and the uncertainty of that something was worse in some ways than a clean threat would have been. To Aldrich, who had been hosting these gatherings for 20 years and had long since developed the useful quality of noticing what other alphas reacted to before they noticed themselves reacting, it registered as significant. He filed it carefully. He said nothing. The second thing was as onyx. He had not moved when the eastern door opened. He had not turned his head. He had been mid-sentence, speaking in a low voice to Seal about the evening's notable subtext, and he had stopped, not dramatically, not in a way that would have been visible to anyone farther than arm's reach, just a half-beat of stillness, a sentence that ended one word before its natural conclusion, and then nothing. He sat very straight in his chair, and his eyes did not go to the window through which any wolf at the northern table could have seen the eastern corridor clearly. He did not look. Ciel noticed. Ciel always noticed, because it was his function to notice, and because after 9 years beside Onyx, He had developed the sensitivity to the man's silences, the way musicians develop sensitivity to rests, understanding that the absence of sound was as full of information as the sound itself. Glanced at Onyx's hands on the table. Still, both of them, no silver, no gold. Nothing is moving beneath the skin. He looked at Onyx's face. The expression there was the one he wore when he was not allowing himself to have an expression, which was different from his ordinary composure. The way a locked door is different from a closed one. You had to know the difference to see it. Ciel knew the difference. He turned back to his wine and said nothing because he was very good at his job. Upstairs in the guest room at the end of the east wing corridor, Freya dropped her back on the bed, sat beside it, and looked at the ceiling. The room was fine. Old but well maintained, the kind of space that had been lived in for a long time and showed it in good ways. Uneven floorboards that had been polished smooth, window frames that had been repainted enough times that you could see the faint raised edges of previous colors at the corners, a heavy quilt on the bed that had the particular density of something that had been washed 100 times and was better for it. She had stayed in worse places. She lay back on the quilt without taking her boots off, looked at the ceiling, and thought about what she had seen through that window. The hall is full of people. The way every head had turned. It had felt, and she understood this was a ridiculous word, an imprecise word, the kind of word she did not usually allow herself, because she worked with data, and data did not traffic in impressions. It had felt like being seen, not looked at, not noticed in the ordinary way of a stranger entering a space that other people occupied. Seen in the way that bypassed the eyes and landed somewhere else entirely, somewhere behind the sternum, in the chest cavity, in whatever part of the body had been doing its own quiet assessment long before the brain arrived. She reached up and pressed the heel of her hand to her breastbone. Still, and strange pressure, less than before, but present. She told herself it was the drive, the altitude, the strange quality of mountain air on a body that had been sitting in a car for 4 hours, and then walked into a building full of people in the middle of some formal event that she was clearly not supposed to be adjacent to. She was very good at explaining things in terms of the available physical evidence. She closed her eyes. Through the floor she could hear, faintly, the resumed rhythm of conversation in the hall below, the low gathered sound of many voices in a large space, shapeless and continuous, like the sound the forest made when you stood in the middle of it and tried to hear any single thing. It did not bother her, the sound. What bothered her was that it had stopped. She fell asleep before the tray arrived. She dreamed of water, dark water, deep water, the kind of underwater black that is not absence of light but presence of depth, and something moving far below the surface. And through pricks, what was to see clearly, and to steady in its movement, to be anything other than purposeful. She woke at 2 in the morning with her boots still on, and the quilt pulled up to her chin by hands that were not hers, and a tray on the bedside table with food that had gone cold, and a card that said in careful handwriting, "Breakfast is served from 6. The administrative office opens at 8. Welcome to Ashford Lodge." She looked at the card for a long time. Welcome. She was not sure that was the right word for what she would walked into. She put the card down and looked at the ceiling again. Below her, the great hall had long since gone quiet. The fires had been banked. The gathered wolves had retired to their rooms or their tents in the cleared ground behind the lodge or the cabins along the tree line that the hosting pack maintained for gatherings. The building held its silence the way old buildings do, not as an absence, but as an accumulation. 300 years of gathered sound pressed into the timber, into the stone, into the places where the walls met the floor, and the floor met the earth. She could still feel the weight in her chest. She told herself it was altitude. She almost believed it. In the room at the opposite end of the lodge, separated by corridors and stairwells and full breadth of the building's old bones, Onyx stood at his window and looked at the same stars he had looked at an hour earlier from the hall below. He had not slept. He was not a man who struggled to sleep. His body was too disciplined for that. Ability to set things down and let them rest until morning was too well developed. Rest was a tool. He used it efficiently. Tonight, he was not using it. His hand rested on the window frame. The skin there was quiet. Nothing is moving beneath it. His wolf was calm, calmer than usual. which was its own kind of unusual, because calm was not the right word for what his wolf ordinarily was. Contained was the right word, managed, held in careful hands. Now it was simply still, the way it went still, he thought, when it was listening for something. He did not know what had come in through that eastern door. He had not looked. He had made a deliberate choice not to look, and that choice had cost him exactly the amount of effort it should not have cost him, and that was the part that was still sitting with him now, at 2 in the morning, at the window, looking at stars that had no information to offer. He had no context for any of this. He did not like having no context. He was a man who built his understanding of situations before he stepped into them, who gathered information, assessed variables, and arrived prepared. 12 years of leading the Obsidian Pack had rewarded that quality and punished its absence consistently enough that it had become not just a habit, but architecture, the way he was constructed at the level of approach. He was not constructed for this particular feeling, which had no name he could access and no variable he could assess, and sat in his chest with the quiet, unmovable persistence of something that had always been there and had simply been waiting for the right moment to make itself known. His wolf shifted beneath his skin, not a rise, not a surge, just a slow, fluid positioning, like a large animal settling more fully into a space it had decided to occupy. He watched the tree line. Somewhere in the east wing above the hall, a light had been on for a while. Now it was off. He turned from the window. Morning at Ashford Lodge came in through the east-facing windows, like something that had been waiting patiently all night for permission to enter. The great hall, cleared and reset by the hosting pack staff in the hours before dawn, carried the particular smell of old wood and extinguished candles, and the ghost of the previous evening's food, a smell that was not unpleasant but was very old, layered into the building across 3 centuries of mornings exactly like this one. Long tables had been repositioned. The formal dinner arrangement had been replaced with the looser configuration used for working sessions, smaller groupings, chairs turned at angles to each other, the spatial suggestion of conversation rather than ceremony. This was the real business of the gathering. The formal dinner was performance. The morning sessions were where things actually moved. Freya found the administrative office at 8:15, slightly later than she would intended, because the east wing of the lodge had a staircase that branched in 2 directions, and she had taken the wrong branch twice, which had brought her through a sitting room, past a trophy display of mounted antlers that she had spent more time looking at than she should have, and into a back corridor that smelled strongly of pine resin and old stone before she would found the right door. The administrator was a compact, efficient woman named Mrs. Harold, who had clearly been managing Ashford Lodge's practical operations for long enough that nothing that happened in it surprised her anymore, a quality that Freya, in the light of the previous evening, found quietly reassuring. "Our consultation has been pushed to this afternoon," Mrs. Harold said, without looking up from whatever she was writing. "The territorial mapping files you will be working from are in the archive room. I will have someone take you there at 2 o'clock. Pushed from this morning? The lodge is hosting a gathering. The morning hours are reserved." "Right." Freya leaned against the doorframe. Is that a regular thing? The gathering? Twice yearly? And it is. What exactly? A conference? Mrs. Harold looked up then, with the expression of a woman who had been asked questions she could not fully answer many times, and had developed a reliable method for redirecting them. "A private organizational meeting," she said. "Breakfast is still available in the East dining room. It runs until 9:30. Freya accepted this the way she accepted most things she could not immediately explain. She noted it, filed it, and decided to think about it later when she had more data. "Thank you," she said. Mrs. Harold had already returned to her writing. The East dining room was smaller than the Great Hall and separated from it by a short connecting corridor. It served as the informal overflow space for gathered wolves who wanted food without the social performance of the main session, a useful function that the hosting pack had recognized over years of gatherings, since Alpha's informal sessions tended toward the political and away from the practical. And practical wolves still needed to eat. Freya did not know any of this. She walked in, found the buffet laid along the left wall, took a plate, and began making selections with the focused efficiency of someone who had been driving on mountain roads and sleeping in her boots and was now operating primarily on the desire for hot food and strong coffee. The room had 8 wolves in it when she entered. All 8 registered her arrival. None of them said anything. She was developing a theory about this lodge, which was that everyone in it had excellent peripheral vision and very few opinions that were willing to share with a stranger. She decided to continue not having an opinion about that until after coffee. She took her plate to a table near the window, sat down, and looked out at the tree line, which in the early morning light was all dark spruce and frost-edged ground, and the kind of stillness that felt occupied rather than empty. She had worked enough land assessment contracts in northern timberline country to know that stillness well. It was not absence. It was everything that lived there simply deciding for the moment not to announce itself. She drank her coffee. Behind her, 7 of the 8 wolves in the room very quietly relocated to tables on the other side of the space. She did not notice. The morning session in the great hall ran long. These sessions always ran long, which was to say that the wolves with the most to lose spent the most time saying the least, and the wolves with established positions spent most of their energy maintaining them rather than advancing them, and the whole machinery of the gathering ground forward at the pace of something enormous that had been moving for a very long time and had developed a momentum that was largely indifferent to the urgency of any individual part. Onyx participated in the way he always participated, minimally in volume, significantly in weight. He spoke 4 times in the first 2 hours. The first 3 times, the room adjusted to what he said, the way compass needles adjust to north. The 4th time, a boundary question that had been generating a circular argument for 40 minutes, resolved itself within 6 minutes of his involvement, and the assembled wolves moved on with the grateful efficiency of people who had been working on a locked door and had finally been handed the right key. He was good at this. He knew he was good at this. He was also aware, with a particular low-frequency awareness that lived in his chest and had been living there since 2 in the morning, that somewhere in the lodge above him or behind him or adjacent to him, the woman from the eastern corridor was moving through the building. He could not have explained how he knew this. It was not scent, or not only scent, which was present, but faint at this distance, and mixed with the accumulated olfactory texture of the lodge itself. It was the wolf. The wolf was tracking something in the way it tracked things that mattered to it, with a quiet, continuous attention that required no effort from him, because it was not using his effort to sustain itself. It was using its own. He set this fact aside. He returned his attention to the Ridgemont matter, which was what the gathering needed from him. The connecting corridor between the east dining room and the great hall was approximately 30 feet long, paneled in the same dark wood as the rest of the lodge, lit by 3 iron fixtures that provided exactly enough light to move through and not enough to linger in comfortably. Freya was in it because she had made a wrong turn again. She had finished breakfast, followed a sign she would seen on the wall pointing towards something labeled reading room, on the assumption that a lodge this size would have a reading room worth sitting in for the hour and a half before her consultation began, and had turned left where she should have turned right, and was now in the connecting corridor looking at a set of double doors at the far end, through which she could hear voices. She stopped. She looked at the doors. She looked at the sign above them that said, Great Hall, in the same careful engraved lettering as every other sign in the lodge. She looked back the way she would come. She had 2 options. Turn around and find the reading room, or go through the doors and cut through the great hall to whatever was on the other side, which she was fairly certain connected to the main staircase, which connected to the east wing, which was where she needed to be. She had grown up in a household that believed the shortest route was the correct route. She pushed open the doors. The great hall had 31 wolves in it. The morning session had broken 10 minutes earlier into the informal interstice that experienced gatherings used to allow for the kind of conversation that could not happen in formal sessions, small groupings, standing exchanges, the fluid social architecture of dominant wolves who preferred to conduct their most important business in the margins, rather than on record. Onyx was standing near the north window with Seal and Aldrich. They were discussing the Ridgemont resolution in the low-voiced, undecorated way of men who have gotten past the performance of a topic and arrived at its actual substance. Aldrich was making a point about the historical precedent. Xiel was listening with the particular quality of listening that meant he was building a response. Onyx was watching the tree line through the window and hearing every word. The great hall's double doors opened, and every wolf in the room felt it before they saw it. That same registering, that same catch in the collective awareness, the same cascading reorientation that had moved through the hall. The previous evening, when the eastern corridor doors swung open, Freya came through the doors, saw the hall full of people, and stopped. For a moment, nobody moved. She stood in the doorway with her hand still on the door handle and a small notebook in her other hand, and her hair pulled back in the practical way of someone who worked outdoors and had long since stopped negotiating with it. And she looked at the assembled wolves, and the assembled wolves looked at her, and the room held the specific silence of something that has just been interrupted at a level below language. Then she said, "Sorry, I am looking for the East Wing staircase. I think I have gone wrong somewhere." Her voice was clear, unhurried, the voice of someone who had decided, consciously or not, that appearing unbothered was the correct response to walking into a room full of people who were all looking at her. Nobody answered, which was, Freya thought, quite strange. She looked around the room for anyone who appeared to be in a less official capacity, the kind of peripheral person at any event who had not fully committed to being involved, and might therefore be available to give directions, and her eyes moved through the assembled faces, some guarded, some openly watchful, some carrying the expression she was beginning to associate with everyone at this lodge, which was the expression of people who knew something she did not. And then, because the room was not that large, and her eyes were moving in the direction of the north window anyway, she saw him. She did not know who he was. She registered him the way you register the deep note in a chord, not separately from the rest, but as the thing the rest was built around. He was standing by the window with two other men, and where the other two men were turned toward her with the same watchful attention as the rest of the room, he had not yet fully turned, and something about the way he was still in the process of turning, the unhurried, inevitable quality of it, though the turn itself was a decision that had been made carefully, made her not look away the way she had looked away from everything else. Their eyes met. She had the same feeling she would had the previous evening, the pressure behind her sternum, the sense of something landing in her chest that had bypassed every layer of distance she usually maintained between herself and new spaces. She took a breath. "The East Wing," she said again, because she was sensible, and she needed to go somewhere. "Is there a door on this side that—" And then someone moved. It was no one's fault. That was the thing Ciel would say afterward, to the pack members who asked, to the elders who needed to understand the sequence of events in precise order. No one moved carelessly. No one made a mistake. The corridor of space between the door and the north window was simply a corridor of space that two people could occupy, moving in perpendicular directions, and the wolf at the far end of the front table had stepped back from his conversation at exactly the moment Freya took her first step into the hall, and she had turned slightly to avoid him and walked directly into Onyx. He had crossed the hall faster than she would registered him moving. That was the first thing that did not make sense, that the distance between the north window and the center of the hall had apparently taken him no time at all, that he was simply suddenly there, and then suddenly in front of her, with a speed that her eyes had not been able to track. She did not enter into speed. She was too focused on not falling, because she had turned to avoid the wolf at the table, and her footing on the old, unevenly worn floorboards had gone wrong, and she had pitched forward, a stumble, genuine and graceless, the kind of stumble that happens when you are moving and not watching the ground, and the ground is older than your expectations of it. And Onyx was there, and his hand came out, and she caught his forearm, and his hand caught her shoulder, and for one full second, we were connected. Her fingers around his forearm, his hand at her shoulder, her momentum stopped, balance, stored the fall that had not happened hanging in the air between them. She looked up. He was looking down. He was very close. His expression was, she would not have the right word for it until later, and even later the right word would escape her, not alarmed, not warm, not cold, but present in a way that felt different from the presence of other people, like standing next to something that had mass in a way that went beyond the physical. She said, "Sorry, the floor," and he said nothing. because something had happened to his arm. She felt it before she saw it, a warmth. Not heat, not the ordinary heat of skin, but something moving beneath the surface of his forearm, beneath her fingers, something with a current to it, traveling upward from the point of contact in a slow, deliberate wave that she felt through her palm as something between vibration and pulse. Looked down at his arm, and the room, which had been breathing in the way rooms breathe, when something is happening that they cannot yet categorize, stopped. The color was not gold, it was not silver, it was nothing any wolf in that room had ever seen move through the veins of another wolf. Nothing from memory, nothing from the old accounts, nothing from the accumulated 100-and-something years that the oldest wolves present had spent learning every color that bloodline and power and dominance could produce in a wolf who carried this particular rare genetic truth. It was dark, but not the dark of red, and not the dark of anything that suggested threat or anger, or the rising of a wolf pushed toward its edge. It was dark, the way the sky above the tree line was dark, not absence, not danger, but depth, shimmering living depth that moved through his veins from the point of her fingers upward, unhurried and absolute, carrying within it something that looked, in the most inadequate possible description that any wolf present would later attempt, like moonlight, dark moonlight. Moonlight that had been traveling through space for longer than anyone in the room had been alive, pressing through the black between stars, arriving here, arriving now, in the veins of a man who was standing very still with his hand at a stranger's shoulder and his eyes on her face, and an expression that had gone somewhere past composure into something no one had a word for. The color moved from his forearm to the inside of his elbow. It moved to the inside of his wrist. It branched faintly into the back of his hand where it lay against her shoulder, faint traces of it visible even there, even through the skin, luminous and quiet, and entirely impossible. It did not stop. It moved upward past his elbow and into his upper arm, and it did not slow, and it did not dim. And the wolves nearest to it took one step back, and then another, not in panic, but in the involuntary way that living things move when they are in the presence of something that rewrites their understanding of scale. Freya became aware that the room had gone completely silent. She became aware of the warmth beneath her palm. She became aware that she should look up, and she looked up, and Nyx was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on another human face. Not pain, not anger, not wonder, though it contained elements of all three, the expression of a man who has encountered something that all of his architecture, all this preparation and discipline and carefully constructed understanding of the world had not prepared him for and could not, in this moment, contain. She said, "What? Do not move," he said. His voice was very quiet, but quiet, the way the air goes quiet, before a very large sound. She did not move. The color in his veins peaked, and when it peaked, it was extraordinary. It was the most extraordinary thing anyone in that hall had ever seen, a man's veins carrying a dark shimmering luminescence from shoulder to hand that made the fire in the iron sconces look flat and insufficient, and then slowly it began its recession, like a tide, like something that had needed to announce itself, and had done so, and was now drawing back with the patience of something that understood. It had made its point. It did not disappear entirely. Even as it faded, a trace remained, the very faintest thread of that dark shimmer in the veins of his forearm, running parallel to the underside of his wrist, visible only when the angle of light was exactly right, visible in this light, always. Freya released his arm. She took one step back, looked at her own hand, which was entirely ordinary, no warmth remaining, no trace of whatever had been moving beneath her fingers, nothing. She looked up at Onyx. He was looking at her still. She turned and looked at the room, at the 31 wolves standing in the attitudes of people who has witnessed something and are still in the process of processing what category to put it in, and she made the entirely reasonable assessment that she did not have the information required to understand what had just happened, that the people in this room clearly did have that information, were choosing collectively not to share it with her, and that the thing she had felt through her palm when she touched his arm had been real and physical, and unlike anything she had a name for. She was a scientist in the practical sense. She knew what to do with the data, but she did not yet have a framework for it. You documented it. You kept your conclusions provisional. You did not pretend the data was not there. She turned back to Onyx. I am Freya Callahan, she said. I am here for a land assessment contract. I am sorry for walking into your meeting. She paused. Are you all right? The question landed in the silent room like something slightly absurd. An alpha she did not know the name of. In a room full of wolves she did not know were wolves, carrying something she had triggered in his veins that had silenced every person present, and she was asking if he was all right. Something happened in Onyx's expression, not quite a smile, something that existed in the same country as a smile, but had traveled a long way to get there. The east wing staircase, he said, is through the door at the far left, down the corridor. First, right. She held his gaze for a moment. She nodded once. She walked to the far left door with the steady, unhurried step of someone who has decided that composure is load-bearing and cannot be set down right now. She went through it. The door swung shut behind her. The room did not move. The silence lasted approximately 10 seconds. 10 full seconds of 31 wolves in a hall that had seen 300 years of significant events, unable to produce a single word. Then Aldrich, from across the room, said quietly, Onyx. I know, Onyx said. That color, I know. His hand was at his side. He turned it over, looked at the underside of his wrist, where the faintest thread of the shimmer still traced its line beneath the skin, patient and luminous, and completely without precedent in anything he had ever known about his own blood. No one here, Seal said from somewhere behind him, his voice stripped to its bare professional function, has ever seen that color. Onyx closed his hand. No, he said, neither have I. He waited until the lodge was fully asleep, not the surface sleep of a building that had simply gone quiet, the deep sleep, the kind that came only after the last wolf had stopped moving through the corridors, after the hosting pack's night sentries had settled into their rotations, after the fires in the great hall had burned themselves down to their lowest ember breath, and the old building had exhaled the day's accumulated tension into the dark, in the way that buildings did, the slow structural settling that sounded, if you were listening, like a very large thing finally allowing itself to rest. Onyx was listening. He sat on the edge of his bed with his forearms on his knees, and his hands loosely clasped, and his eyes on the floor, and he waited, and he listened, and when the lodge had finally reached the particular quality of silence he needed, he stood up, took his jacket from the chair, and went out through the back. The cleared ground behind the lodge was empty at this hour. The cabins along the tree line had their lights off. The hosting pack sentries were on the perimeter, not the interior. He could hear them, faint and regular, their footfall patterns telling him their positions with the accuracy that his senses had been providing him since adolescence, when his wolf had come in fully and rewritten the scale of the world around him. He walked past the cabins, past the tree line's first edge, into the forest. The northern forest at this altitude at this hour was a specific kind of dark, layered, dense, full of the small, continuous sounds of things living in it that did not require light to go about their business. His eyes adjusted immediately, the way wolf eyes did, the world rendering itself in the high-contrast clarity of a predator's night vision, every trunk distinct, every stone, the depression in the ground where a root had heaved the soil over decades, the faint phosphorescent pale of frost on the north-facing sides of things. He went deeper. He wanted distance. Not from the lodge, not from the gathering, not from the 31 wolves who had been in the great hall this morning, and had seen what they had seen, and were currently lying in their beds, either sleeping or not sleeping, but all of them turning the same question over and over in the dark. Wanted distance from the trace of shimmer in his veins, which was still there, faint, the merest suggestion of it, the ghost of what had blazed through him in the hall when her fingers closed around his forearm, but continuous, unbroken. It had not gone the way gold went, the way silver went, burning clear and leaving him ordinary again. This had receded but not departed, and a fact of its remaining was the most unsettling thing that had happened to him in 12 years of being the kind of man who was not easily unsettled. He stopped in a clearing. The trees opened here into an oval of sky, a gap in the canopy wide enough that stars were visible in their full architecture. the river of the Milky Way, broad and cold and present above him, the kind of sky that made the distances between things legible. He looked up at it. He had been holding the wolf back all day. Not fighting it, that was a different thing, a harder thing, the kind of thing that cost you. This was something subtler, the kind of holding that was less about restraint and more about negotiation. His wolf had wanted to surface from the moment Freya's hand closed around his arm. Not in aggression, not in the way it surfaced when bold came, dominance rising, the animal pressing toward its edge, in something else. Something he did not have the right taxonomy for, because it had not happened to him before. The wolf had wanted to be seen. He had held it back through the remainder of the morning session, through the afternoon, through the dinner that he had attended and participated in with the full external performance of a man in complete control of himself, while underneath that performance, his wolf sat in the configuration of something that was waiting rather than resting. He had held it through the evening. He was not going to hold it through the night. He took a breath. He let go. The shift came fast. It always came fast for him, faster than most wolves, faster than was typical even for alphas. The transition between forms collapsing the way a wave collapses when it reaches shallow water, all the accumulated energy of the build arriving at once. His body knew the change the way it knew breathing. There was pain in it. There was always pain in it. The body does not rewrite itself without cost, and anyone who told you differently was either lying or had not shifted enough times to remember that the pain was part of it, was structural, was the sensation of becoming exactly what you were. Batting on 4 legs. The obsidian wolf was large, not the largest in recorded pack history. That distinction belonged to an alpha, 3 generations back, who had existed at the edge of something mythological, had left no clear lineage, but large in the way that things built for function rather than display are large, the size of a wolf that had never been bred toward any purpose except the purpose its nature had always intended. Black from the crown of his skull to the ends of his paws, the kind of black that existed before black had a name, not the absence of color, but the original dark, the deep primary dark, that everything else was a variation of. He stood in the clearing and breathed. The forest came in fuller at 4. The scent map of the world above the snow line, the layered information in the air, bark, resin, and frost, and the mineral cold of the stone beneath the soil, and somewhere beyond the perimeter, the wood smoke from the lodge's banked fires, and the 30-some wolves sleeping in their various configurations, each one carrying their distinct signature, each one readable as its own kind of text. He breathed all of it in. His wolf took a slow step forward, testing the ground. The clearing was wide enough for a circle, and he made one, moving in the long, unhurried stride that was his wolf's default register. Not patrol, not pursuit, just movement, for the sake of inhabiting the space, of being the right size in the right place in the dark. And then the shimmer came. Felt it before he saw it, the same warmth that had moved through his veins in the hall, that same deep traveling current, arriving now in the wolf, the way it had arrived in the man, from some interior point that was not quite the chest, and was not quite the spine, but was somewhere at the convergence of both and moving outward through his fur. He stopped. He turned his head and looked at his own foreleg, and what he saw there stopped every other thought in his mind with the totality of something that rewrote the available categories. The shimmer was in his fur, not the way color lives in fur, not a surface phenomenon, not a tint or a sheen, or the way certain wolves' coats caught specific light. This was beneath the surface or within it, moving through the individual strands the way it had moved through his veins, traveling, living, carrying that same dark luminescence that was not quite light and not quite darkness, but the impossible intersection of both. It moved from his foreleg upward, threading through the dense black of his coat, in lines that followed the same paths the color had followed through his veins, the interior lines, the deep channels, the map of a power that had always been his, and was now showing itself in a form he had never known it could take. He looked at his other foreleg, the same. He turned and looked at his flank, and the shimmer was there too, broader here, the moonlit threads spreading through the black fur, in the patterns that starlight made on deep water, each strand of it carrying the same cold, traveling luminescence, the same quality of something that had come from very far away and arrived with the patience of a thing that knew it would get here eventually. He was still. The cleared oval of sky above him reflected nothing. The stars held their distances. He lifted his head. The first thing he noticed was the strength, not the ordinary strength of his wolf, which was already substantial, the clean mechanical power of a body built for exactly the demands placed on it. This was something layered beneath that, the way a foundation is layered beneath a structure, and you do not know the foundation is there until you test the structure under real load. He was aware of it, the way you become aware of depth when you step off a shelf into open water. The ground does not change beneath you, but the available depth suddenly reveals itself as something far greater than you had mapped. He took a step. The ground under his paw felt different. More present, more legible was the wrong word, but it was the closest word, as though the forest floor was something he was now reading, at a resolution he had not previously had access to. Every variation in the soil, every root below the frost line, every stone beneath the root, present and exact, and without effort. He took another step, and the stride felt different, not longer, not faster, exactly, but more certain. The way a thing moves when doubt has been removed from its mechanics, when the body stops negotiating with itself about what it is as simply as it, completely, without reservation. He had run as his wolf 10,000 times. More, his wolf was as familiar to him as his own hands, as his own voice. This felt like meeting it for the first time. He ran, not because there was somewhere to go, not in pursuit of anything. He ran because the body had to know, because the intelligence of a wolf in full shift is not the intelligence of reflection and patience, but the intelligence of motion, of the land beneath the feet, of the air and the dark and the angle of descent, as the ground dropped away toward the valley below. The lodge's northern face. He ran, and the trees moved past him, and the cold came in, and the shimmer in his fur moved with him, not streaming backward, not trailing like light from a moving thing, but constant, present, as though it was not moving at all, but was simply his, simply the truth of what he was in this form on this night, in this clearing, and re-clearing beyond it. He ran harder. The slope dropped, and he took it in long bounds, the distance between footfalls, stretching as the ground fell away, the valley below resolving in his night vision as a deep dark bowl of forest with the river cutting through it, reflecting starlight in the cold flat way of water that has no warmth left in it. He covered 300 meters in the time it would have taken him 30 seconds to cover standing, and at the bottom of the slope where the ground leveled he ran harder still, and the shimmer ran with him, and a strength beneath his ordinary strength was simply there, available, inexhaustible. Like discovering a room in a house you have lived in for years that was always there, always behind the wall, and the wall was thin, and it had always only needed the right moment to fall. He ran until he reached the river. He stopped at its edge, panting, and looked at his reflection in the dark water. The wolf in the water was his wolf, black, massive, unmistakably, the obsidian wolf that 11 years of the obsidian pack's history had been built around, that 30 packs knew by description, and several knew by direct encounter, that existed in the regional consciousness of the supernatural world as a symbol of something that did not need to demonstrate itself because what it was had already been demonstrated sufficiently. But the wolf in the water was threaded with light, dark light, moonlight that had no moon to account for it. The reflection showed it clearly, showed the way it moved through his coat in the slow continuous circulation of something alive, not a static pattern but a living one, shifting in its distribution, way breathing shifts the chest, imperceptibly and constantly. He looked at his reflection for a long time. His wolf looked back. The shimmer in the water's surface did not diminish. It did not waver. It sat in the black fur of his reflected image, with the permanence of something that had always been there, and had simply been waiting, the way a color waits inside a mineral until the right light hits it, the way a frequency waits inside a string until the right touch finds it. He thought about the call this morning. He thought about 31 wolves going still. He thought about the specific sensation, her fingers closing around his forearm, not a grip, not pressure, just the ordinary reflexive contact of a person stopping a fall, and the way that ordinary contact had been the key Something in him that 12 years of dominance and discipline, and the careful management of a power he had always known was unusual, had never come close to touching. She had touched him for less than 30 seconds. The shimmer in his fur was not a lesser version of what had happened in the hall. Was the same thing. Running, he stood at the river's edge until the cold had worked itself fully into the parts of him that cold could reach, which were fewer parts than it could reach in his human form, and then he turned and went back up the slope. He ran differently on the return, not faster. Was not chasing anything and was not fleeing anything, and the wolf understood both of those things. He ran with attention, the way a wolf runs when it is learning the ground, noting the weight of his stride and the quality of the power beneath it, and the way the shimmer moved through him as the terrain changed. Steeper here, the engagement of different muscles, the shimmer redistributing through the coat without dimming, constant as breath, constant as the river's movement below him in the dark. He was mapping what he had become, provisionally. He was not a man who arrived at conclusions before he had the full data. He was a man who built accurate pictures, and the picture he was building required more information than one night's run through a forest could provide, and he knew that, and he held the knowledge carefully. But he also knew what he had felt, underneath the need for more information, underneath discipline and patience and the architecture of a mind built for restraint. He knew what he had felt when the strength revealed itself, when the shimmer moved through his coat for the first time, and the forest came in sharper, and the ground beneath his paws was more legible, and the distance he had just covered at the base of the slope had taken no more effort than breathing. He had felt for the first time in his adult life what his wolf was capable of, not what it was, not its current form, its capacity, the depth of what it had always been able to become, sitting below the surface of every shift he had ever taken, waiting for whatever it had needed to wait for her, apparently, for a woman in a lodge corridor carrying a notebook and a set of wrong directions, who had asked him if he was all right. As though that was the relevant question, as though the relevant question was not what she was, what she had done, why the color in his veins had never existed before she walked through a door, and why it showed no interest in leaving just because she had. He came out of the forest at the back of the lodge and shifted in the shadow of the tree line. His human body came back with the same efficiency as always. The shimmer retreated. He felt it go, felt the wolf settle in the way it always settled when he returned to two legs, taking the depth of the world down with it, narrowing the sensory field back to human scale, but not entirely. In the skin of his forearm, in the exact place her fingers had closed. Around him, the trace remained. He looked at it in the dark. It looked back. He went inside. The lodge held its deep sleep around him as he moved through the back corridor and up the east wing stairs, and he moved through it with the quietness that was simply his nature, taking up no more sound than the building itself made. In its settling, he stopped at the top of the east wing staircase. At the far end of the corridor, the light under the last door on the left was on. He stood very still. His wolf, beneath the skin, was doing the thing it had been doing since last night, not rising, not pushing, just attending. That particular steady quality of attention that was neither hunger nor aggression, but something that had no clean name because it had never needed one until now. The light stayed on. He turned and walked to his own room. He did not sleep for a long time, and when he did, his dreams were full of dark water and the particular sound the forest made at the bottom of a valley at 3 in the morning. All depth and distance in the continuous presence of everything that lived in the dark, without needing to be anything other than exactly what it was. The Elder Council did not convene in the Great Hall. The Great Hall was for Alphas, for the performance of authority, for the display of alliance, and the careful theater of negotiation that kept 30 packs from doing what packs, left to their own instincts, eventually did to each other. The Great Hall had a function, and the elders understood that function and had no use for it. They met instead in the archive room. Ashford Lodge's archive room was at the end of a stone corridor on the ground floor, behind a door that was older than the rest of the building, salvaged, according to the lodge's oldest records, from a structure that had stood on this land before the lodge was built, before the Timberline Road existed, before the first regional gathering had been called, and the wolves of the Northern Territory had decided the collective order was preferable to the alternative. The door was iron-banded hardwood, dark with age, and it opened inward with the particular weight of something that had been keeping things in, or out, for a very long time. Inside, the archive room was long and narrow and smelled of what it contained: old paper, old leather, the specific mineral. Dryness of documents that had been kept in stable conditions across more generations than anyone currently living could claim direct connection to. Shelves ran floor to ceiling on both walls, packed with bound volumes and rolled documents in protective casings, and flat boxes of varying sizes that contained things too fragile for binding. At the far end, a table of dark wood held a lamp and a set of magnifying instruments, and a pair of cotton gloves, folded with the precision of things returned to their exact place after every use. Aldrich was already there when the others arrived. He had been there since before dawn, which was not unusual for a man who had been hosting these gatherings for 20 years, and who had learned that the mornings after significant events required preparation that the events themselves, being unpredictable, rarely afforded time for. He had pulled 4 volumes from the lower shelves. He was reading the first, third one. When Elder Marin came through the door, there were 6 elders at this gathering. Not all packs sent them. Some of the younger alpha lines had let their elder traditions lapse, which was its own kind of information about those packs and their relationship with the longer view of things. The 6 who were present represented the oldest pack lineages in the Northern Territory, bloodlines that trace back to the first generations of the Moon Goddess's blessing, families that had been keeping records and tending to institutional memory since before records had been standardized, and institutional memory had been the only archive available. Elder Marin was the oldest of the 6. She was a small woman who had been small for so long that her smallness had become a kind of authority in itself, the particular presence of someone who had outlasted every assumption about what she was and what she was capable of, and had long since stopped being interested in managing other people's surprise about it. She was 81 years old. Her wolf was older than that in the way wolves aged differently from the human form, slower, deeper, accumulating rather than diminishing. She moved carefully but without hesitation, the way people move when they trust the body they are in completely, when they and their wolf have been acquainted for so long that the relationship has arrived at something past negotiation, into simple fluency. She looked at the volumes on the table. Looked at Aldrich. "You were awake," she said. "I was. You saw it clearly? From where you were standing?" "Clearly enough." He turned the page he was reading so she could see it. "I have been looking since 4 o'clock. She came to the table, put on the cotton gloves, and looked at the page. Her expression did not change, which was the expression of a woman who had trained herself across 8 decades to understand that visible reactions belong to the person having them, and not necessarily to the room. "This is not the right text," she said. "I know. I am working toward it. Which volume? I do not know yet. That is the problem." She pulled out the chair across from him and sat. "Tell me what you saw," she said. "Exactly." The other 4 elders arrived in the next 20 minutes. They came separately, which was how elders moved through gatherings, not as a body, not in the way alphas move with their seconds and their inner circles, but individually, each one finding their own path to the room that needed to be occupied, the way water finds the lowest point by its own route, regardless of the routes available. Elder Corvin arrived second. He was 73, a large man gone lean with age, with hands that had always been too big for the rest of him, and a mind that had always been too precise for most of the conversations he was required to have. He took one of the volumes from the table without asking, turned to its index and began reading. Elder Sena and Elder Drust came together, not by arrangement but by coincidence, having encountered each other in the corridor, and walked the rest of the way in the companionable silence of 2 people who had known each other for 40 years and had long since exhausted the need to fill every space with words. Sena was 68, Drust 70. They were both readers rather than talkers. They took volumes and they read, and the room arranged itself around the sound of pages turning. Elder Wynn arrived last. Wynn was different from the other 5, in the way that occasionally one wolf in a generation is different, not in power, not in bloodline, but in the quality of their relationship with the old knowledge. Where the others carried the accumulated text as reference, Wynn carried them as memory. She was 64 years old, and had spent 40 of those years doing nothing but reading everything the packs had produced across every lineage that would grant her access. And what she had built in that time was not a collection but a structure, a way of understanding how the pieces fit, how the old stories connected to each other, and in the places where they appeared not to connect, how the gaps between recorded events were themselves a kind of information. She came through the door, looked at the table, looked at Aldrich, and said, the dark shimmer moving upward from the point of contact. Yes, Aldrich said, both arms, into the shoulder. Yes, and the color, dark luminous, not gold, not silver, not any color any wolf in that hall had seen before. Wynne set down the bag she was carrying. From it, she removed a volume that none of the others had pulled from the shelves, smaller than the standard archive volumes, bound in a leather that was darker and more worn than the others, with no title on the spine. She set it on the table with the particular care of someone handling something that they know to be irreplaceable. I have been carrying this since last night, she said. The room was quiet. You knew? Marin asked. I suspected. Wynne sat. I needed to see it confirmed before I said anything, and I did not want to say anything in the hall. She opened the volume to a page near the center. The paper was pale with age, and the writing on it was in a hand that had not been standardized, not the careful record-keeping script of the archive volumes, but something older, something written by a hand that was setting down information it was not sure would survive, and was therefore trying to put as much of it as possible into each line. She turned it so the table could read it. The text was in the old tongue, the written form of the language that the first wolves had used before the modern territories had developed their distinct dialects, the common ancestor of the various regional forms that existed now as formal ceremonial registers, rather than living speech. All 6 elders could read it. It was taught to every elder candidate as part of their preparation, on the basis that a people who could not read their own oldest records was a people operating on a summary of themselves rather than the source. Marin read it first, slowly. Then she read it again. She set the volume down. She took off the cotton gloves. She looked at Wynne. How long have you known this text existed? She said. I found it 11 years ago, Wynne said. In the Greyhold collection, when their alpha line died out, their archive was transferred here for preservation. It was bound inside another volume, a later record, mid-period, legal boundary documentation. Someone had put it there deliberately, hidden it, possibly, or simply kept it close to something they considered important. And you did not. I documented it. I translated it. I kept it. Wynne's voice was even, because it described something that had not occurred in recorded history, and I had no evidence it was going to occur in my lifetime, and the practical consequence of raising a theoretical flag about a theoretical event in this particular community. She paused. Is that the theoretical flag? Comes political before anyone has had a time to think about it carefully. A short silence. Corvin, still reading, said, That was a reasonable judgment. It was the judgment I made, Wynne said. Now the event has occurred, and the judgment is superseded. She reached across and turned the volume so the lamplight fell more directly on the text. I will translate, she said, for the record, so everyone in this room has the same version. She translated carefully, with the particular patience of someone who understood that translation was not transcription, that the old tongue carried nuances that the modern language did not have direct equivalents for, and that choosing the wrong modern word for an old concept could introduce distortions that compounded across every subsequent interpretation. The text was not long, but it was precise. In the first generation, the moon goddess not only made wolves, she also made the conditions for what wolves could become. Among the things she placed in the world were those she called old naming, Ethonvel, the unbound light. Not wolves themselves, not of any pack or bloodline. Ordinary in their visible form, carrying no mark and no power of their own, but placed by design, in the lines of the world, at the intersections of bloodline and time that the goddess had calculated across generations, because she works in generations, not in years, and what she builds slowly. The Ethonvel are catalysts. They do not carry power. They carry the key to power that already exists, but has not yet found its full form. A wolf who meets their catalyst will know it by a sign in the blood, a color that does not exist in the known spectrum of dominance, neither gold nor silver nor red, but a fourth thing, the goddess's own color, which is the color of moonlight, in the deep dark where no moon has ever physically shone. This color does not fade fully once triggered. It is not a warning. It is not a threat. It is a beginning. The wolf who carries it has been selected, not by human choosing, not by pack politics or lineage, or the earned weight of authority, but by the goddess herself, across a calculation that began before the wolf was born. Such a wolf is not simply an alpha. Such a wolf is what first wolves were always meant to become. The catalyst does not know what they are. This is part of the design. They carry the key in their living presence in the fact of their touch, and they carry it unknowingly because the goddess understood that knowledge changes a thing before it has had time to simply be itself. Handle this with care. Handle the catalyst with greater care. What has been unlocked cannot be locked again. What has begun will continue. The bond between the wolf and their Ethonvel is not the mate bond. It is older than the mate bond. It is the condition that makes the mate bond possible at the level it was always supposed to reach. Do not let politics touch it before it has had time to be understood. This is the most important instruction in this text. Do not let politics touch it. Wynne closed the volume. The lamp on the table burned steadily. Outside, through the stone walls, the muffled sounds of the lodge's mourning continued. The distant movement of wolves through corridors, the low register of voices from the floors. Above the ordinary business of a gathering that was not yet aware of what was sitting in the archive room beneath it, Elder Drust said slowly, "Ethonvel." "Yes," Wynne said. "I have encountered the term once. In a secondary source, a later pack history from the Southern Territory mentioned it in passing as a myth. A story used to explain unusual alpha development in early lineages." He paused. "It was presented as a metaphor." "Most things that survive into later records as metaphors," Wynne said, "were not metaphors when they were first written down." Corvin set down the volume he had been reading. "This is accurate. The evidence in the Great Hall this morning is consistent with everything in this text," Wynne said, "in every particular." "If it is accurate," Corvin continued, "then Onyx is not simply displaying an unusual genetic trait. He is in the process of a fundamental," he searched for the word, "augmentation," of his wolf, of his power, of whatever he already is, moving toward what he was designed to be. "Yes," Wynne said, "and the woman is the mechanism. The woman is the catalyst. She is not a mechanism. The text is specific about that distinction. She does not know what she is." "No." The table was quiet for a moment. Marin looked at the volume, then at Wynne. "The text says do not let politics touch it. It does. There are 37 pack representations in this lodge. There are at least 4 alphas who saw what happened in the hall this morning, clearly enough to understand that what they saw was not ordinary, and who will now be sitting with the question of what it means for the balance of power in this region, if the Obsidian Alpha is in the process of becoming something that does not currently have a ceiling they can locate." Wynne said nothing. She had already located this problem before she walked through the door. She had located it the night before, lying awake with the small volume on her chest and the sounds of the lodge settling around her. "She is a human," Elder Senna said. It was the first time she had spoken. Her voice was quiet and carried the careful quality of someone introducing a variable that the conversation had not yet addressed. "Not a wolf. Not any bloodline I could identify. Her scent carries nothing pack-marked. The text does not say the catalyst is a wolf," Wynne said. "No," Sina agreed. "It says ordinary, invisible form." "And she came here," Drust said, "for a land assessment contract." "She came here," Wynne said, "because the moon goddess works in generations, and the intersection of bloodline and time that the text describes had this lodge, this gathering, and this woman at the same point on the same evening. The land assessment contract is how the goddess moves things into position." She paused. "She does not use announcements. She uses circumstances." The room held that. "Onyx needs to be told," Corvin said. "Onyx knows something has happened," Aldrich said. He had been mostly quiet since the translation, listening in the way he listened at the head table, fully building the picture, waiting until the picture was complete enough to act on. He does not know the name for it yet. He does not need to be told the way you tell a person something they have no context for. He needs the text. He needs the context, Marin agreed. And he needs it before the other alphas in his building start having their own conversations about what they saw. Some of those conversations have already started, Aldrich said. Kieran's second came to me at breakfast with questions he framed as curiosity but were not. Kieran is young and ambitious and not subtle about it, Corbin said. Kieran is a problem that is going to get worse as this develops, Aldrich said, without particular heat. It was simply accurate. He will not be the only one. The text says to handle the catalyst with greater care than the wolf, Senna said, looking at the closed volume. She does not know. She came here for a contract. She has no supernatural context at all. She does not know what these people are, what this gathering is, what she did yesterday when she touched him. She paused. She is going to need to be told. And that conversation is going to change everything she understands about the world she is living in. That conversation, Marin said quietly, belongs to Onyx. Does he know that? He will. Wynne picked up the volume and held it for a moment before returning it to her bag. She had carried it across the night and the morning, and she would carry it for a while longer. It was not ready for the open shelf yet. Things that had been hidden for a reason required some care in their reemergence. One more thing, she said. The text uses the word beginning. What has been unlocked cannot be locked again. What has begun will continue. She looked around the table. Yesterday was the first touch. It lasted less than a minute. What we saw in the hall, the color, the intensity of it, that was the first contact, the initial trigger. She let that sit in the room. Corbin understood first. His expression shifted. You are saying what we saw yesterday was the minimum. I am saying what we saw yesterday was the door opening, Wynne said, not what is on the other side of it. The lamp on the table burned. Outside, the lodge continued its mourning. Below the stone of the archive room's floor, the old roots of the northern forest pressed into the earth, and the slow, inexorable way of things had measured their growth in centuries rather than years, reaching toward whatever they needed, patient in ways that nothing short-lived could fully understand. Elder Marin put the cotton gloves back on and opened the first of the 4 volumes Aldrich had pulled from the shelves. Then we had better understand everything this building knows, she said. Before everything this building knows, us being sufficient, she began to read. He told himself it was an assessment. That was the word he used. Standing at the East Wing corridor window at 7:15 in the morning, watching the frost-edged ground below where the hosting pack's younger wolves were running the perimeter in their morning rotation. Assessment. The gathering had produced an event. The event had produced variables. The variables required evaluation before he could determine what, if anything, they meant for the Ascidian pack and for the decisions he would need to make in the coming days. This was how he had approached every significant development in 12 years of leading. He assessed. He determined. He acted. He was very good at all 3. The problem was that assessment, in its honest form, required proximity to the thing being assessed. And the thing that currently required assessment was a woman named Freya Callahan, who had come to Ashford Lodge for an entirely ordinary professional reason, who had walked through the wrong door and stumbled on an uneven floor and touched his arm for less than 30 seconds, and in whose presence his veins had done something that had silenced 31 wolves and produced a color that an elder was currently, somewhere in the lower floors of this building, trying to locate in texts that were older than the lodge itself. Assessment required proximity. He told himself that was why he went. Downstairs, she was in the east dining room again. He knew before he reached the door. His wolf had known since the second-floor landing, that same quiet attending he would been carrying since the previous evening, the steady orientation of something that had found its bearing and was not interested in oozing it again. He stopped outside the door for exactly the amount of time it took him to decide that stopping outside the door was its own kind of information, and then he pushed it open and went in. The dining room held 6 wolves at that hour, all from different packs, all engaged in the low-voiced separate conversations of early morning at a gathering where the formal sessions had not yet begun, and the social architecture was still assembling itself. They registered his arrival in the way wolves always register his arrival, a fractional reorientation, a subtle straightening, the collective adjustment of bodies in a room when something that outranks them enters. He went to the buffet. He was aware, without looking, of where she was. Far table. Left window, the same position she had occupied the previous morning. She had a field notebook open beside her plate, and she was writing in it with the focused, slightly bent posture of someone recording observations, the working posture, not the thinking posture. She was already working at 7:15 in the morning, before her consultation was scheduled, because she was the kind of person who worked when she had time and did not require an appointment with herself to start. He took a plate and filled it with less attention than usual, and went to the table, too removed from hers. He lasted approximately 4 minutes. He was aware of the distance across those 4 minutes, with a precision that was embarrassing in its detail, the exact gap between his table and hers, the angle of her shoulders as she wrote, the particular quality of her concentration, which was total and inward, and entirely unaware of him in the way that made the awareness go in only one direction and sit there with no outlet. His veins were doing nothing visible, but beneath the surface, beneath the skin of his forearm, in the trace that had not departed since her touch, there was warmth. Not the traveling warmth of the hall, not the current, not the shimmer that had moved through his wolf's fur and flaring, just warmth. A low, continuous warmth in the specific channel of skin and vein that her fingers had covered, as though the contact had left an impression that was still being processed. He picked up his coffee. He stood up. He moved to her table and sat across from her and said, "Freya Callahan." She looked up from her notebook. For a half-second, her expression was the expression of someone whose concentration had been interrupted, not irritated, just recalibrating, the rapid adjustment of a mind coming back from somewhere interior to the room it was sitting in. Then it settled, and she looked at him with the same directness you would have in the hall, the same quality of assessment that did not use her eyes the way most people used their eyes, which was to check for threat or welcome or social cue. She used them to actually look. "You know my name," she said. "Mrs. Harold is efficient, and you needed to know the name of the person who walked into your meeting." "I needed to know several things about the person who walked into my meeting." She held his gaze for a moment, and he could see her deciding something, not about whether to engage, that decision had already been made, but about how directly to engage, which was a different calculation entirely. "Onyx," he said, not a question. She had learned his name between yesterday and today through whatever means available. He did not ask, it did not matter. Yes, just Onyx, for most purposes. She looked at him for another moment, and then, to his complete lack of surprise, she said, "What happened to your arm yesterday?" Not a question either. Statement shaped like one, the way scientists stated hypotheses, precisely, with the understanding that precision was not the same as certainty, and that the statement was the beginning of an investigation rather than a conclusion. "That," he said, "is one of the things I am currently trying to understand." She did not accept this as a full answer. Her expression said so, clearly and without hostility. She had the quality of someone who had learned that information, withheld for any reason, had a habit of becoming relevant at the worst possible moment, and had therefore developed an efficient intolerance for incomplete disclosure. "It felt like heat," she said, "moving, under the skin. When I was holding your arm, you felt it, through my palm." "Yes." She paused. "I have been trying to find a physical explanation for it since yesterday morning. I have not found one that fully accounts for the visual component. E-color, T-color." She looked at the table for a moment and then back at him. "I have seen bioluminescence. I have seen the kind of vascular response that comes with extreme physical exertion or temperature change. I have seen the man's veins show clearly through fair skin under strong direct light." She met his eyes. "That was none of those things." He held her gaze. "No," said, "it was not. And everyone in that room knew it." She waited for him to continue. When he did not, she looked at him with the expression of a woman who had decided that patience was the correct instrument here, not pressure, and was deploying it with the deliberate precision of someone who knew the difference. "I will tell you what I can," he said, "when I have a better understanding of it myself. That's not very much." "No," he said, "it is not. But it is accurate, and I do not offer inaccurate things to fill silence. Something in her expression shifted, not softening exactly, but adjusting. She looked at him as though he had said something she had not expected, and was now revising a prior assessment. "All right," she said. She picked up her pen and looked at the notebook, and then set the pen down again, which he understood to mean that the conversation was taking priority over the work, which told him something about how she organized her attention. "You came and sat at my table," she said. "I did. As that an assessment?" He considered this. The honest answer was more complicated than the available words could carry cleanly, but he was not a man who simplified honest answers for the convenience of the conversation. "Partly," he said. She looked at him steadily. "And the other part?" He looked at his forearm on the table between them. The trace was invisible at this angle, in this light, just ordinary skin, ordinary veins carrying ordinary blood. But beneath the surface the warmth was there, constant as breathing, and something beneath the warmth was doing the thing his wolf did, the attending, the quiet orientation toward a point of reference it had decided mattered. "I do not have a complete answer to that yet," he said. She followed his gaze to his arm. She was quiet for a moment. "The heat is still there," she said, quietly. "Not a question." "Yes." She looked up at him. "Since yesterday morning? Since the moment you touched it?" She was still for a long moment. Then she did something he had not anticipated. She reached across the table, slowly, telegraphing the motion with the care of someone who understood that the last unannounced contact had produced significant consequences, and she placed 2 fingers lightly on the back of his forearm. The warmth became a current, not the blaze of the hall, not that first explosive surge, but a deep, traveling warmth that moved from the point of her fingers upward toward his elbow, and he felt the wolf beneath his skin settle in the way it had settled during his run in night forest, that full, unguarded easement, the particular quality of stillness that was not suppression but its opposite, the wolf not held but genuinely, uncomplicatedly still. He looked at his arm. The shimmer was there, faint compared to yesterday, the trace rather than the blaze, but visible. The dark moonlit thread running in the channel of vein, from the point of her touch toward his elbow, quiet and continuous and entirely present. She was looking at it too. Her fingers had not moved. 2 fingers, like contact, the same still quality that people assume when they are attending to something they do not want to disturb. "It is still doing it," she said. "Yes." "Does it hurt?" "No." He paused. "The opposite." She looked up at him. In her eyes was the expression of a person who has just received a data point that does not fit any of their current models, and is now recalibrating the models rather than the data. It was an honest expression. He had limited experience with people whose first instinct was to revise their own framework rather than dismiss the information that challenged it. "What does it feel like?" she asked. He thought about the forest, about the depth of the world at 4 legs under the shimmer, the resolution, the legibility of the ground, the strength beneath the strength. "Like something I did not know was incomplete," he said carefully. "Being completed." She looked at him for a long moment. Her fingers were still on his arm. "I do not know what to do with that," she said. "Neither do I," he said. "Yet." She removed her hand after another few seconds, not abruptly, not in discomfort, but with the deliberate care of someone who had gathered the data they needed and was now returning the instrument to its neutral state. The warmth did not leave. It never left. He was beginning to understand. Her touch amplified it, brought it to the surface, turned the trace to current, but the underlying warmth was simply there, had been there since yesterday, was not contingent on contact, the way the color had been contingent on contact, was something that the first touch had established, and the subsequent distance had not diminished. He was building the picture, incomplete still, more variables than conclusions, but the picture was building. She picked up her pen and wrote something in her notebook. He did not look at what it was. Not his business. Not yet. She had her own process of understanding things, and that process was hers. "The people in that room yesterday," she said, "they were barricaded up from the notebook. They knew what they were seeing." "It was not a question, some of them," he said, "and what they were seeing was significant." "Yes, to your organization." He was quiet for a moment, parsing the word, organization, with a particular care it deserved. She was using the most neutral available term for something she had no framework for. That was precise of her. "To my world," he said. She looked up then. He held her gaze, and in that moment, he was aware of the exact calibration required. What to say, what to withhold, not for control but for honesty, because the full truth of her situation required a context she did not yet have, and he was not going to give her a partial truth dressed as a complete one. "I will tell you more," he said. "I need a day, perhaps two, to understand it yourself first." As she considered this, "Are you asking me to stay?" The question landed cleanly. He appreciated clean questions. "I am telling you," he said, "that your land assessment contract is legitimate, and Mrs. Harold will accommodate it for as long as necessary, and that I would prefer you to remain at the lodge until I can give you the conversation you deserve." "The conversation I deserve," she repeated. "A full one," he said, "not a partial one." She looked at him for a long moment with the expression of someone calculating the weight of competing interests, curiosity against caution, the familiar against the genuinely unknown, the instinct that told her this was significant against the other instinct that told her significant things, required care before commitment. She looked at his forearm. The trace had quieted again to its resting state, invisible in this light, present beneath the surface. She looked back at her notebook. "I have a week's worth of archive material to get through," she said. "I was not going anywhere immediately." He stood up. "Thank you," he said. She looked up at him, and there was something in her expression that was not quite amusement, and not quite challenge, but lived in the country between them. "Do not thank me yet," she said. "You still owe me a full conversation." "I know," he said. He took his plate and his coffee back to the side table, and sat and ate, and watched the frost-edged tree line through the window, and was aware, in the specific low-frequency way that he was aware of everything that mattered, of the woman 2 tables away writing in her notebook with the focus, unhurried concentration of someone who had decided, for now, to work with the available information. His wolf was still, not held, not managed. Not the disciplined containment that 12 years had made his default register. Simply still. The way still was supposed to feel, he thought. Not like absence, not like effort, not like something large held in careful hands. Like a thing that had found its ground and rested there without negotiation. He did not know what to do with that. He knew with the certainty that lived below preference and below logic, in the place where the wolf made its own assessments, that he was going to find out. He spent the morning session. The Great Hall. The Richmont matter had reached a point requiring formal documentation, and the boundary questions from the southern packs needed to be addressed. Aldrich was navigating both simultaneously with the 20 years of practice that made him very good at his particular function. Onyx participation added value, and was quiet where silence was more useful, and the machinery of the gathering moved forward at its ordinary pace. He was aware below the conversation, and below the formal work of the session, of where she was. She was in the archive room. He could not have explained precisely how he knew this. Scent at this distance was more inference than fact, and the wolf's attending was not precise enough to distinguish individual rooms within a building. But he knew, in the way he knew the positions of the sentries in the dark or the weight of weather before it arrived, that she was below him and 2 corridors east, and that she was working. He found this. Steadying was the closest word. Not a distraction, the opposite of a distraction. The way a fixed point was not a distraction when you were navigating. It was the reference against which everything else could be accurately measured. He noted this, added it to the picture he was building, and set it aside. During the midday recess, Seal fell into step beside him in the corridor. With the practiced ease of a second, who had long since learned to match his alpha's pace and direction, without requiring either to be announced. "Kieran's been talking to the Eastern delegation," Seal said, quietly, about the hall and about her specifically, who she is, where she came from, what her connection to you is. "He will not find anything. She has no connection to me that predates yesterday morning. That is the part that is interesting to him," Seal said. "A woman with no prior connection, no pack, no lineage, who walks in off the street and produces a color no one has ever seen in the veins of the obsidian alpha." He paused. He is not the only one who is curious. I know. The elders met this morning. Early. I know that too. Ciel was quiet for 3 steps. Is there anything I need to prepare for? Onyx looked at the corridor ahead of them, at the old wood and the iron fixtures, and the 300 years of this building standing in its place, in the dark northern forest, carrying everything it had accumulated, and making no particular comment about any of it. Keep Karen's people away from her, he said, quietly. I do not want her approached, and if they have already, find out, quietly. Ciel nodded once, the nod of a man who was good at his job and knew it, and did not require additional instruction. They walked the rest of the corridor in the companionable silence of 2 people who had been in proximity long enough to understand that not all information needed to travel through. Still, she was still in the archive room when the afternoon session ended. He knew because he passed the door. He passed it on his way from the Great Hall to the North Staircase, which was not the most direct route from the Great Hall to the North Staircase, a fact he was fully aware of, and chose not to examine too closely. He stopped at the door. He did not knock. He stood at the door and through it. He could hear the sound of pages turning, slow, attentive, the sound of genuine engagement with material, rather than the sound of someone moving through it by obligation. And beneath his skin the warmth was there, the trace of the shimmer in his forearm, doing its constant quiet thing, the wolf at rest in its new and still somewhat unsettling register of simply being still. He had told her a day before. Perhaps, too, he needed to talk to Wynne. He needed to understand what the elders had found before he had any business offering Freya Callahan the full conversation she had been promised, before he put words to something he only half understood and handed her a half-built bridge to stand on. He took his hand off the door he had not knocked on and went to find the elder. Behind the closed door, pages continued their quiet turning. The warmth in his arm continued its quiet presence. He went up the North Staircase and told himself he was not counting the hours until tomorrow. He was not, he reflected, particularly convincing. She had filled 14 pages of her field notebook by the end of the 2nd day, not land assessment notes. Those were in the separate binder she would brought for the contract work, the one with the grid paper and the standardized documentation format she used for every territorial mapping project, clean, categorical, built for the kind of information that had established measurements and agreed upon units, and did not require the recorder to make judgment calls about whether what they were observing was real. The 14 pages were the other kind of notes, the kind she had been keeping since she was 19 years old and working her first field contract in the northern marshlands, when she would understood, for the first time, that the world had a layer beneath its visible surface that most people moved across without ever pressing down hard enough to feel the depth below, and that she was, for reasons she had never fully accounted for, constitutionally incapable of not pressing down. 14 pages of Ashford Lodge. Of the gathering, of the wolves she did not know were wolves, of him. The first page had been written the night she arrived. Something happened when I walked past that hall. Not threat. I want to be precise about that because threat has a distinct physiological signature, and this was not it. This was recognition. The room recognized me before I recognized the room. I do not know what that means. I am writing it down because I do not trust myself to remember the exact quality of it accurately if I wait until morning. The woman who redirected me upstairs was managing a situation, not unkindly, but deliberately. There was a protocol she was following. I do not know what the protocol was for. The 2nd page had been the morning after the dining room. After the 8 wolves had relocated to the far side of the room without making it obvious that it was what they were doing. Collective behavior, unified response to a stimulus. The stimulus is me. This is not paranoia. Paranoia is the perception of a threat that is not there. I am not perceiving a threat. I am perceiving attention, which is different, and the attention is real. I have tested it twice this morning by changing position and watching whether the orientation of the room changes with me. It does. Question: what are they seeing when they look at me that I cannot see myself? The 3rd page was after the hall, after the stumble, after the color in his veins. She had stood in the east wing staircase for 10 minutes, thinking about it before she could continue up to her room. She had filled that page and turned it, and kept going. The archive room was cold in the mornings and warmer by midday, when the stone walls had absorbed enough of the lodge's interior heat to give some of it back. She had established her working position at the near end of the long table, facing the door, because she was in an environment she did not fully understand, and facing the door was simply sensible, and she had arranged the territorial mapping files in the standardized order she always used, and she had worked through them with the focused efficiency that was her professional default, and simultaneously in the part of her mind that ran parallel to the professional default, and had been running parallel to it since she was 19, she had been watching. The archive room's door was rarely fully closed. This was, she suspected, a practical consequence of the building's age. The stone corridor was damp enough to cause the iron hardware to swell, and a door left ajar was a door that could be opened and got the leverage required by a fully latched one. Whatever the reason, the result was that she had a consistent, narrow view of the corridor outside, and the corridor outside was, at various points throughout the day, occupied by wolves moving between the lodge's various spaces. She watched them. She was good at watching people. It was the other half of field work, the half that did not make it into the methodology sections of her reports, but was responsible for at least 40% of what those reports were able to say. You could not assess a landscape without understanding what moved through it and how, and people were no different from the landscape in that respect. What she observed was this: they moved differently from the people she knew. Not dramatically, not in any way that would have been visible to someone who was not pressing down on the world looking for the layer beneath, but consistently, and in ways that accumulated into a pattern. They were more deliberate, more spatially aware. When two of them passed each other in the corridor, even incidentally, even mid-conversation, there was a micro-adjustment in their relative positioning that she had seen in exactly one other context in her professional life, which was when she had spent 3 weeks tracking wolfpack movement in the eastern preserves for a conservation assessment 7 years ago, dominant and subordinate. That was the vocabulary. Not aggressive, not performative, simply present in the body, in the automatic calculation of space and deference and priority, the way it was present in every social animal that organized itself by hierarchy. She had written, "They know where they stand relative to each other at all times," without looking, and then, on the next line, how. She had noticed also what happened when Onyx moved through the lodge. She had not been looking for it specifically. She would been looking at everything, which meant she caught things at the periphery of her attention rather than in its center, and what she caught when he passed through a space consistent enough across multiple observations to constitute a pattern. The room changed, not in the obvious way. People standing or falling silent or performing the visible gestures of deference. She would see in hierarchical organizations of all kinds, in fieldwork, in academic departments, in the kind of professional environments where authority was worn on the body like a garment. This was below that. This was the involuntary shift, the version that happened before the brain could moderate it, the way a compass needle moves, before you have decided to look at it. Everyone in a room with him pointed, slightly, in his direction. She had tested this twice, from her position in the dining room that first morning, by watching the orientation of the 8 wolves, who had relocated to the far tables when she arrived. They had maintained their adjustment around her for the duration of her meal. Then he had come in and taken a plate, and without making any particular announcement of his arrival, the orientation of every wolf in the room had adjusted again, slightly, involuntarily, in the way iron filings adjust to a magnet, toward the point where he was standing. Except her. She had noticed this about herself, that she did not do the adjusting. She noticed him, absolutely, noticed him with a precision and attention that she was not going to be dishonest about. But the noticing was not involuntary. It was chosen, every time. She chose to look at him. The wolves around her appeared not to be choosing. This meant something. She had written it down. Everyone in the room orients toward him automatically. I orient toward him by decision, different mechanism. What does that mean about what I am to this system versus what they are? She did not have an answer yet. She had kept the page. On the afternoon of the second day, she went to the lodge's upper library, a small room on the second floor with better light than the archive room, and a set of chairs by the window that the gathering's members used during recesses for informal conversation, and she sat in one of the chairs with her field notebook and watched the tree line and tried to organize what she had. What she had was this: a building full of people who responded to each other and to space and to hierarchy in ways that were consistent with a specific kind of social organization. Organize, old, rooted in something she did not have the vocabulary for yet, a gathering that was not a conference, the diplomatic language, the formal sessions, the careful navigation of something that felt like territorial claims. She had heard enough through the great hall's walls during her corridor passages to build a rough picture. This was governance, old governance, the kind that predated the forms of organization she was familiar with, a woman, herself, whose presence produced a collective response in this population that she could not account for. Not a threat, not welcome, recognition, word she had used on the first night, and had not found a better word for since. A man whose veins had lit with a color that existed in no biological catalog she had access to, at the moment she touched him, in front of witnesses who had not been surprised by the fact of his veins doing something extraordinary, only by the specific color they had done it in. She sat with this. The tree line was the same dark spruce it had been on every previous look. The frost on the north-facing ground had not fully cleared by this hour. A bird she could not identify crossed the visible strip of sky above the tree canopy in a long, smooth arc that suggested something large and unhurried. She was not afraid. She wanted to be precise about this in her own accounting. She was not afraid because the situation, however strange, did not register as threatening. The people here had not harmed her, had not misled her, had managed her presence with a kind of careful consideration that was the opposite of hostile. Onyx had come to her table and told her he would give her a full conversation when he was ready to give her an accurate one. And that was, she had turned this over enough times to be sure, the statement of someone who took honesty seriously rather than instrumentally. She was not afraid. She was, however, aware with a particular acute awareness of a person who understood that they were missing a significant proportion of the available information, that she was navigating a landscape she did not have a map for, and that the people around her did, and that the gap between those two positions was not neutral. She was also aware that the gap was closing, not because she had been given information, because she was watching, and the watching was compressing the gap from her side, the way field observation compressed the gap between a landscape you knew from documents and a landscape you knew from standing in it. She was learning the shape of this place. She did not know yet what it was, but she was learning its shape. The thing she had not written down, the thing that existed in the notebook only in the space between pages, in the gaps between observations, in the white margins of every page that was otherwise full of data, was the feeling. She was a scientist in the practical sense. She believed in data. She believed in precision and replication and the subordination of preference to evidence, and she had organized her professional life around these beliefs, with the consistency of someone who found them genuinely sustaining rather than merely correct. She was also a person who had spent enough time in landscapes that had weight to them, marshlands and old forests, and the kind of elevated terrain where the geological record was visible in the cliff faces, where you could put your hand on stone and feel the compression of time in it, to understand that some information arrived through channels that did not have established names yet. The feeling had no established name. It had been with her since she had arrived at this lodge, since she had stood at the interior window and seen the hall full of people who had all turned toward her, and it was not diminishing. If anything, with each day that passed, it was becoming clearer, not louder, clearer, the way a signal becomes clearer when you adjust the receiver, when you find the right frequency, when the static resolves into something structured and recognizable. The feeling was this: she was in the right place, not in the anodyne sense, not in the comfortable sense, in the sense that something had been building toward this specific location for longer than she had been alive to move toward it, and that the building had arrived, and she was standing in the result. She had no framework for that. She had written it down anyway, in the margin of page 11, in the small handwriting she used when she was not sure something belonged in the main body of the record. The feeling of arriving somewhere you did not know you were traveling to. He came to the upper library at 4:30. She heard him before she saw him. Not footsteps exactly, but the particular quality of displacement that a person of his size produced in the air of a corridor, the way the acoustic texture of a space changed when it was being moved through by something that occupied it fully. She had identified this quality of his movement on the second day. He was quiet, but the space was never unaware of him. He came through the door and saw her by the window and stopped, not the stop of surprise, the stop of someone who has arrived somewhere and is taking a half-second to read the room before proceeding into it. "I am not interrupting your work," he said. It was not a question. He could see the notebook was closed, that she was simply sitting, that she had been thinking rather than working. "No," she said. He came in and sat in the chair across from her. Not the chair closest to hers, one removed, maintaining a gap that she understood was deliberate and appreciated for reasons she did not fully have language for yet. He looked at the tree line. She looked at him. She had written about this, in the careful clinical language she used when she wanted to be honest without being imprecise, a quality of physical presence that was different from other people's. Not performance, not the conscious projection of authority that she would seen in people who needed to be seen as powerful. Something that was simply structurally true about him, the way the load-bearing walls of an old building were structurally true. You could move through all the other rooms in the house and feel that something was holding it up without being able to immediately identify what. His hands were on the arms of the chair. She looked at the forearm nearest her. The trace was there. She could see it, just barely. In the light from the window, the faintest suggestion of something beneath the surface of the skin, following the line of the vein from wrist to elbow. Not luminous in this light, not the shimmer she would seen in the hall, just present. A thread of something that had not been there before she touched him and had not departed since. She looked up and found him watching her. "You can see it," he said. "I can see something." "It does not go," he said, not with distress, just with the flat accuracy of someone reporting a fact they are still in the process of determining the meaning of. "Since the hall, since the moment of contact." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "Does anyone else know it does not go?" "My second. The elders, likely." He paused. "It is visible in direct light to any wolf close enough to see it." She noted the word, wolf, as she would note any unfamiliar term in a landscape she was learning, without reaction, without performance of either surprise or recognition, filing it carefully for later. Not yet. He had said a day, perhaps two. She would give him the time he had asked for, but she noted the word. "The people here," she said. "The ones at the gathering." "Yes. They are all." She chose the word with the precision she had been building toward across 2 days of observation, the same kind. He looked at her with the expression that was not quite a smile, but had been traveling in its direction consistently since the first morning. "Yes," he said. "And I am not." "No," he said. "You are not, but I am." She looked at his arm, at the trace in his veins. "Relevant to what you are." His expression shifted. Something moved through it that was more than the almost smile, something deeper, something that had the quality of a thing that had been held at a careful distance and had, in this moment, moved slightly closer to the surface. "Yes," he said, "that is the most accurate short version." She looked at him steadily. "I have more questions than that will hold." "I know, and you still need time," he said. "Less than I did this morning," he said. "I spoke to one of the elders. I have more of the picture now." "How much more?" He was quiet for a moment, and she could see him doing the thing she had observed him doing consistently across 2 days of watching, building his response precisely, discarding the imprecise versions, arriving at the one he could stand behind. "Enough," he said, "to tell you that what happened in the hall was not an accident, and was not a malfunction, and was not something that has happened to anyone in this room in living memory. But it has happened before. There is a text," he said, "old enough that most people in this gathering did not know it existed. It has a name for what you are." She held very still. "What I am," she repeated. "What you are to me," he said carefully, "in this context, in this world. And that is the part you are still building. That is the part that requires the full conversation," he said, "which I will give you." He looked at her directly. "Tonight, if you are willing." She looked at him across the chair between them, at the trace in his forearm, and the steadiness in his face, and the quality of his presence that filled the room, the way the load-bearing wall filled the house. Structurally, without announcement, she had 14 pages of observations and no framework. For any of them, she had a feeling of arriving somewhere she had not known she was traveling to. She had the memory of warmth, moving beneath her palm like something alive, like something that had been waiting for exactly the touch that found it. "Yes," she said, "tonight." She went back to her room before dinner. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her hands, both of them, front and back, the ordinary hands of the person who worked outdoors, with the particular calluses of someone who used measuring equipment and climbing gear, and the handles of various instruments in various landscapes across a professional life that she had built carefully and was proud of. She looked at the right hand, one that had touched his arm. Ordinary. No trace, no warmth, no evidence of any kind that anything had moved through it, or from it, or because of it, but she remembered the feeling through her palm. The current, the warmth that was not heat, the sense of something on the other side of the contact that was very large and very old, and had been waiting with the patience of something that understood. Waiting was not the same as absence. She flexed her fingers. Outside her window, the forest held its occupied stillness. The sun had dropped behind the tree line, and the sky above the spruce was the specific blue of northern altitude, at the edge of dark. Not night yet, not day anymore, the color that existed in the transition between the two, brief and precise and belonging entirely to itself. She had no framework. She had arrived somewhere she had not known she was traveling to. She picked up her notebook, opened it to page 15, and began to write. She was still writing when the knock came at her door. Not Onyx. She knew his quality of displacement in a corridor, and this was not it. She opened the door to find a wolf she did not recognize, a man in his mid-30s with a heavy build that she had begun to associate with the higher-ranked members of the gathering, and an expression that was wearing friendliness over something she could not immediately name, but that her field instincts, which were good and which she trusted, identified as not friendly. "Miss Callahan," he said, with a practiced ease of someone who had chosen the casual form of address deliberately, "I hope I am not disturbing you. My name is Kieran. I lead a brief pause that was too brief to be genuine, organization that covers the Eastern Territory. I wanted to introduce myself, welcome you properly. Understand you have been here a few days and no one's made the effort." She looked at him. She thought about 14 pages of field notes, about the precision she would develop across 2 days of watching a population she did not have a framework for, about the word organization used twice now by 2 different people, once as her own neutral approximation, and once by this man, with the careful deployment of someone who had heard her use it, and was now borrowing it back to establish common ground. She thought about what Onyx had said. Keep Kieran's people away from her. She had not heard this. But she had heard, in the quality of the corridor outside her room, over the past 2 days, the particular sound of traffic that was not casual, and she had noted it. "That is kind of you," she said, with the pleasantness that she had learned, across many years of working in environments where she was an outsider by definition, to deploy with the precision of a tool rather than the spontaneity of a feeling. "I have been well looked after. By Onyx, I understand." The name dropped into the sentence with a weight that was supposed to sound incidental. "By Mrs. Harold," Freya said. "She has been very helpful." A brief adjustment in his expression, minor, way controlled, but present. "Of course," he said. "I only asked because what happened in the hall the other morning, I imagine that was disorienting. For someone who is not familiar with another fractional pause, our customs." She looked at him steadily. He was not going to give her the framework. He was going to offer her a version of it, a shaped version, a version with intentions behind its architecture, and he was going to watch how she responded to it, and use that watching for something she could not fully see yet. She was very good at identifying this pattern. She had encountered it in every professional environment she had ever worked in where she had information that someone else wanted. "I have been disoriented since I arrived," she said pleasantly. "It is a very interesting lodge. Thank you for stopping by, Mr. Kieran." She closed the door. She stood with her back to it for a moment, She opened her notebook to page 15 and wrote, at the top of a fresh section, Kiran, Eastern Territory. Interested in what happened in the hall, came to my room, offered the framework before I asked for it. Do not engage further without more information. She closed the notebook. She had 4 hours before dinner. She thought about the full conversation Onyx had promised her. She thought about what it meant that someone else had come to her door first, and what it meant that she had identified the approach as an approach rather than a welcome, and what it meant that her field instincts, which were good, which she trusted, which had never told her something was wrong when something was not wrong, were currently telling her, with quiet and insistent consistency, that she needed to understand the shape of this place before anyone else in it had the opportunity to explain it to her first. She was the woman who knew nothing, but she was also the woman who had 14 pages of notes and a mind built for landscapes, and landscapes, in her experience, always revealed themselves eventually to any patient enough to stay in them and keep watching. She had decided to stay. She picked up her pen. She kept writing. The confrontation did not begin as a confrontation. That was the nature of things in gathered spaces where dominance was the organizing principle, and politics was the language dominance used when it was trying to be civilized. Things began as conversations, as inquiries, as the kind of carefully ordered approach that maintained plausible distance from its own intention until the distance was no longer useful. It began specifically as a question. Kiran's second, a wolf named Aldous, broad through the jaw and shoulders in the way of someone who had been told his size was an asset, organized his self-presentation accordingly, found Onyx in the north corridor between the afternoon session and the dinner hour, and said with the air of a man raising something that had only just occurred to him, "The woman, the one from the hall, what is she to the obsidian pack?" Onyx looked at him. "That," he said, "is not a question you are authorized to ask." Aldous' expression adjusted, not retreat, but the micro-recollection of someone who had been given a clearer answer than they would prepared for, and was deciding whether to absorb it or push through it. He pushed through it. "Kiran's concern," he said, with the careful phrasing of a man delivering a message he would been coached on, "is that an unaffiliated human at a pack gathering, producing an effect on a senior alpha that has not been documented in living memory, represents a variable that the Eastern Territory has an interest in understanding. The Eastern Territory's interests," Onyx said, "do not extend to my pack's business. With respect, if she is not your pack's business either, and she is simply a human who wandered into the lodge by accident," Aldous left the sentence open in the particular way of someone who had been instructed to leave it open, an invitation to fill the space with a clarification that could then be used. Onyx was quiet for 1 full second. "Walk away," he said. Aldous walked away. He told Seal within the hour. Seal listened without interruption, which was his habit, and when Onyx had finished, Seal said, "Kiran is moving faster than I expected. He is young alphas mistake speed for advantage. He has 4 wolves from the Eastern delegation who have not been in the formal sessions today. I have been tracking their positions." Onyx looked at him. "They have been near the archive room," Kale said, "and the East Wing. 3 separate passes this afternoon." The picture assembled itself with the particular cold efficiency of a mind that processed threat the way it processed everything else, completely, without the interference of the reaction the threat was designed to produce. "She is in her room," Onyx said. "As of 40 minutes ago, I had written check. Keep him on the East Wing. Already done." Sale paused. "And the dinner?" The gathering's formal dinner was in 2 hours. Mandatory attendance for all senior representatives. The social architecture of these gatherings required it, the performance of collective order that held the machinery together, even when the machinery's individual parts were working against each other. Underneath the performance, Kiran would be at the dinner. Freya would be at the dinner. Mrs. Harold had extended the invitation that afternoon, the standard courtesy extended to lodge guests during gathering events, and she had accepted, which was exactly what a person with 14 pages of field notes and a mind built for observation would do when offered an opportunity to be "Watch the seating," Onyx said. The dinner began without incident. This was not the same as beginning well. It began without incident, the way a fire began without incident, present, controlled. with the potential for something different entirely, living in the conditions around it, waiting on a change in the available oxygen. Freya arrived at the great hall's main doors, at 7 on the mark, which Onyx noted from his position at the northern end of the head table, with the particular quality of noting things he had been doing since she arrived at this lodge, involuntarily, accurately, and with a precision that had no precedent in his prior experience of noting things. She had dressed for the dinner, without overdressing for it, dark clothing, practical in its cut, the kind of wardrobe that suggested someone who had packed for field work and made a single concession to formality, a jacket over what she would otherwise have worn, the jacket doing the work of the occasion without performing it. Her field notebook was not with her. Her hands were empty. She moved into the room with the unhurried steadiness he had come to understand was not performance but architecture, the way she was built at the level of approach, the same quality in a dinner hall that it was in an archive room or a corridor or a chair by a library window. She found her seat, the guest position, 2 tables removed from the head table, toward the east wall, and she sat, and she did what she did, which was watch. He watched her watch. Across the table from him, CL was engaged in a conversation with Aldrich's representative that required just enough of his attention to free the rest for the room, which was the efficient kind of engagement CL was good at. At the far end of the secondary table, Kieran sat with his delegation. He had not looked at Onyx since the dinner began. He was looking at Frey with the particular quality of a man who was not yet doing anything but had decided what he was going to do. Onyx set down his fork. It happened between the first and second courses. Not a fight. Not yet. A movement. 4 wolves from the eastern delegation rising from their positions at the secondary table with the coordinated ease of people who had arranged this movement in advance, redistributing through the hall in the way liquid redistributes when its container tilts toward the lower point. Lower point was the east wall. The lower point was where Freya was sitting. She had seen them before they reached her. He could tell by the quality of her stillness, which had shifted from the open attending of observation to the particular stillness of someone who has identified an approach, deciding how to meet it. Her field notebook instinct working even without the notebook, the first wolf stopped at her table and began to speak. Onyx was on his feet before the second word. He did not hurry. He did not need to. The distance between the head table and the east wall was not large enough to require hurry, and hurry would have been the wrong note. Hurry suggested alarm, and alarm suggested that the situation had a scale that he was not going to allow it to have. He moved through the dinner with the particular quality of movement that the 30-some wolves in the room registered with their bodies before their minds caught up. The automatic orientation that Freya had documented in her notebook without knowing what it was, every wolf in the room knowing where he was moving and what was in that direction, and understanding that the level below language, that the space between him and that direction was clearing. It cleared. He reached her table. The first wolf, one of Kieran's mid-ranks, young dominant trying to look casual and not managing it, looked up at Onyx's arrival with the expression of someone who had been told this was a straightforward task and was now revising that estimate significantly. "You are at the wrong table," Onyx said. Not loud. Never loud. He had not needed loud in 12 years. The mid-rank looked at his companions. The companions looked at the floor. "Kieran asked us to welcome the guest," the wolf said, with the diminishing confidence of someone whose script had not prepared him for this specific page. "The guest," Onyx said, "has been welcomed." From the far end of the room, Kieran rose from his chair. The hall went quiet in the way it had gone quiet twice before in Onyx's presence, not all at once but in a wave, the nearest tables first, the farther ones following as the quality of the air in the room changed, and the change traveled outward. The way all genuine changes traveled, by the simple fact of being real. Kieran crossed the hall. He was younger than Onyx by perhaps 8 years, and moved with the particular energy of a dominant wolf who had not yet found the ceiling of his power and was in the process of testing every surface encountered to locate it. He was not a small wolf. He had the physical build of someone whose wolf had come in heavy, and whose human form carried the impression of it, broad through the chest and shoulders, with the slightly compressed quality of a body that was most fully itself at 4 legs rather than 2. He stopped 10 feet from Onyx's position. Woman is unaffiliated, he said, not to Onyx's second, not through any intermediary. Directly, with the clarity of someone who had decided that the indirect approach had produced its results, and the direct approach was now the correct instrument. No pack, no alpha claim, no affiliation of any kind. He paused. In our laws, that makes her a free variable. In our laws, Onyx said, she is a guest of this lodge, which is under Aldrich's authority, which Aldrich extends through me. Aldrich's authority is territorial. The woman is not of this territory. The woman, Onyx said, is under my protection. The hall absorbed this. The phrasing was precise, and everyone in the room knew it was precise. Under my protection was not the language of hospitality or of pack courtesy. It was the language of claim, old language, the kind of language that sat in the oldest layer of pack law, older than the territorial structures, older than the regional governance that these gatherings existed to maintain, going back to a time when such declarations were made with blood rather than words, and the wolves who heard them understood that the difference was largely procedural. Kieran's jaw tightened. On what basis? On the basis, Onyx said, that I am the senior alpha in this lodge, that the event in this hall 2 mornings ago is pack business and not Eastern Territory business, and that you have sent your wolves to approach her twice today and once last evening, and I am telling you, directly, that it will not happen again. A silence, and if I dispute the claim, Kieran said. Onyx looked at him. The look was sufficient for most of the room, not for Kieran, who was young and ambitious and had come here with something to prove, and had, in the manner of young ambitious wolves who came to gatherings with something to prove, allowed the proving to become more important than the wisdom of the timing. Then disputed, Kieran said. And he dropped his chin, a fractional movement, a gesture so small it would have been invisible in any other context. But in this context, in this room, with this language already on the floor between them, it was the equivalent of a door coming off its hinges. It was a challenge, not full, not formal, not the declared challenge of the pack law with its protocols and its witnesses and its established procedures, but the posture of one, the suggestion of one, the wolf beneath the man making its position legible, in the way that wolves make things legible, through the body rather than through words. The hall made no sound. At the east wall, Freya was very still. Onyx was already outside before anyone fully processed that he had moved, not through the main doors, through the side entrance, the eastern corridor door, the one she had come through on the first night. He had opened it with one hand without looking at it, and moved through it with the economy of a man who was no longer managing anything, and the managing had stopped not in anger, not the red, not the edge, but in something colder and more absolute, the kind of decision that did not require emotion, because it had passed through emotion and arrived at certainty. The cleared ground behind the lodge received him in the dark. He heard the hall behind him erupt into the low, urgent sound of 30 wolves processing what they had just watched, heard the side door open again as Kieran came through it, heard the subsequent sounds of others following, not the full gathering, but enough. The witnesses that a moment like this is generated by its own gravity. Seal's voice behind him. Onyx. He turned. Kieran had stopped 15 feet away on the cleared ground. He had 4 of his wolves behind him, and the expression of a man who had committed to a direction and understood that the only available path was forward. Around the cleared ground, at the edges of the light from the lodge's exterior fixtures, the witnesses assembled. Aldrich among them to Onyx's left, Merrin, Wynn, Seal at his right shoulder. His own inner circle fanned out behind him with the fluid automatic positioning of wolves who had done this before, and at the lodge's side door, Freya, who had followed because she was the woman who watched, and Onyx's movement through the hall had been the kind of movement that generated its own gravity, who stood at the edge of the light with her arms at her sides, and her expression carrying the sharp, focused quality of someone who has understood that they are about to see something that will rewrite the available categories. He did not look at her. He looked at Kieran. Last opportunity, he said, to make a different choice. Kieran held his ground. Onyx dropped. Shift was the fastest any wolf present had ever witnessed. Not because it was desperate, not the ragged emergency shift of a wolf backed into a corner, but because there was no resistance in it. None of the negotiation, the incremental yielding of form to form that even the most experienced shifters carried in the transition. He gave himself to it completely, without reservation, and the wolf received him the way deep water receives something dropped into it from height. Total immersion, immediate, without the surface tension that slowed other things. The obsidian wolf came up out of the shift like the ground itself. Pausing, it was larger than people remembered. It was always larger than people remembered. Memory had the habit of scaling things toward the believable, of trimming the impossible edges to fit the available framework, and the obsidian wolf existed outside the available framework, consistently enough that every wolf who had seen it carried a version of it that was smaller than the truth. Truth was this: the wolf stood at the shoulder height of a large draft horse. Its head, when level, came to the chest of a standing man. Its paws on the cleared ground made no sound, and left deep impressions in the frost-edged soil, and the black of its coat in the exterior light was the original dark, the deep primary dark that existed before color had a name. Kieran's wolves took 3 steps back. Kieran did not. He was holding round in pride and on the irreversibility of the decision he had made, and Onyx respected this in the abstract, the way he respected any commitment, however poorly timed. And then the shimmer came. It did not come gradually. It did not begin in one place and travel to another, the way it had moved. Through his veins in the hall, the slow, deliberate wave of it, the tide-like quality that had given the watching wolves time to process it as arrived. It came everywhere at once. Every strand of his black coat, from the crown of his skull to the tips of his paws, lit with the dark moonlit shimmer, simultaneously, as though the power had been waiting in him at full charge, and the shift had simply removed the last insulation between the charge and its expression. The moonlit threads moved through his fur in the living circulation that Freya had not yet seen in its full form, not the trace, not the suggestion, but the blazing full reality of it, the dark luminescence that was not surface color, but interior light, the goddess's own color running through the obsidian wolf in the patterns that starlight made on the deepest water, every strand of black fur carrying within it the cold, traveling light of something that had come from further away than anyone in this gathering could calculate. The cleared ground went white under him. Not actually. The ground was the same frost-edged soil it had been before. But the light from the shimmer had reached the ground beneath his paws, and the light from the shimmer had reached the faces of the assembled witnesses, and the light from the shimmer had reached the wall of the lodge behind him, and the world in a 10-meter radius of the obsidian wolf was operating a different level of illumination than the world outside that radius, and the difference was not subtle. Kieran's remaining composure left him. Not in fear, or not only in fear, but in the particular breakdown of a fixed framework encountering something that it cannot accommodate, the same structural failure that happened in a mind when the world produced something genuinely outside the available categories. He took 1 step back. He took another. Onyx did not advance. He stood on the cleared ground and breathed, and the shimmer breathed with him, and the strength beneath his ordinary strength, the depth of it, the revealed capacity that had announced itself in the night forest, was simply present, available, inexhaustible, the way the foundation of a building was simply present beneath everything built on top of it. He was not performing. That was the thing that made it extraordinary rather than merely impressive. There was no performance in it, no display, no calibrated showing of force. He was simply what he was, fully and without reservation, and what he was had become, in the moment of the shift, the truest version of itself that it had ever been. His own pack took a step back. He did not note this consciously. He would note it later, in the human form, when CL told him quietly and without judgment that every member of the obsidian pack present on that cleared ground has stepped back, not in fear of him, but in the involuntary response of wolves whose alpha had just revealed a depth they had not known he carried and whose bodies had understood, before their minds could frame it, that they were standing next to something that had changed. In the moment he was aware only of the cleared ground and the cold and shimmer moving through him, in its continuous circulation, and Karan across the distance. Between them, in the posture of a wolf who had made a choice and now understood its full weight, he held it for 10 seconds, not threatening, not advancing, simply present, completely, in the way that things which have found their full form are present, without effort, without performance, without anything left over for doubt. Then he turned his head. He turned it toward the side door of the lodge, toward her. She was exactly where she had been, standing at the edge of the light with her arms at her sides, at her face carrying the expression that he would remember across every subsequent hour and day. Not fear, not awe, though awe was there, the genuine article, the kind that stripped a face of everything it had learned to wear in front of the world, and left only what was actually there underneath. She was looking at him. She was looking at the shimmer in his fur. She was looking at it with the expression of a person who has just found the framework, who has been moving through a landscape with 14 pages of notes and no map, and has just, this moment, standing at the side door of an old lodge in the northern timberline, found the map, recognized the territory, understood what the shapes in the dark have been all along. He held her gaze for 3 full seconds. His wolf, beneath the shimmer, beneath the strength, in the deepest register of its being, was still. The way still was supposed to feel. He shifted back. The return came with the same efficiency as the departure. No reluctance, no resistance. The wolf yielding the form back to the man with the full cooperation of something that had said what it needed to say and was satisfied. He straightened, looked at Kieran, and Kieran, to his credit, met his eyes. He had taken 3 steps back, and he had lost the ground of the challenge, and everyone present knew both of these things and would know them long after this gathering was over. But he was meeting Onyx's eyes, which was the thing he could still choose, and he was choosing it. The woman, Onyx said, is not a free variable. His voice was the same as always, quiet, undecorated, a voice of a man who had said everything else with his wolf, and was now simply providing the language for what had already been communicated. He looked at Aldrich. Aldrich nodded once. He looked at Seal. Seal was already moving, the quiet, efficient movement of a second repositioning his people, closing the distance around the cleared ground, directing the witnesses back toward the lodge, with the practiced ease of someone who had managed the aftermath of significant events before and understood that the most important work happened in the 10 minutes following. He turned toward the side door. Freya had not moved. She was looking at him, at the man now, at the human form that the wolf had returned, at the forearm where the shimmer had retreated to its trace, faint and continuous at present. He stopped in front of her. She looked up at him. "Tonight," he said quietly, "I will tell you everything." She was quiet for a moment. "I already know some of it," she said. "I know you do," he said. "The rest of it," she said, "I have been waiting for since I walked through that door." He looked at her, at the directness of her, at the notebook mind and the field scientist precision, and the particular quality of a person who had been pressing down on the world, looking for the depth beneath it, and had just found, on a frost-edged clearing behind an old lodge timberline, that the depth was considerably greater than any prior observation had suggested. "Then we will finish it tonight," he said. He opened the side door. She went in. He followed. Behind them, the cleared ground held the impressions of his paws in the frost-edged soil, deep, wide, carrying the particular compression of something very heavy that had stood in one place. With great certainty, the shimmer was gone from the ground, but the impressions remained. The gathering had a memory. This was the thing about assembling 37 pack representations in a single location. The event that happened on the cleared ground behind Ashford Lodge on the 3rd evening did not belong only to the wolves who had witnessed it. It belonged to every wolf who had a representative present, which meant it belonged to 37 packs, which meant it belonged to every wolf in every pack who had a connection to anyone in that building, which meant that by the time the sun came up on the 4th morning, the event had already traveled beyond the lodge's walls and was moving through the northern territory at the speed that significant information always moved through wolf populations, fast, without friction, carrying, in its movement, the particular distortion that information acquired when it passed through enough channels, growing at the edges, compressing at the center, the specific facts remaining roughly intact, while the meaning the facts were freighted with expanded to fill whatever container it was poured into. The specific facts were these: the obsidian alpha had shifted on the clearing ground in response to challenge from the Eastern Territory's young alpha, and the shift had produced something that no wolf present had seen in living memory, and the something was connected, in ways that the witnesses were still processing, to an unaffiliated human woman who had arrived at the lodge for an ordinary, professional reason, and had touched the obsidian alpha's arm in the great hall 2 mornings prior. The meaning those facts were freighted with expanded considerably in transit. The full conversation happened the night of the clearing, not in the great hall, not in any room that belonged to Gathering's official architecture, in the small sitting room at the end of the north corridor, a room that the lodge used for private meetings and that Aldrich had made available without being asked, because Aldrich had 20 years of experience and understood what needed to happen next, and had ensured the conditions for it without making the ensuring visible. Onyx told her everything. He told it the way he did everything, precisely, without decoration, in the order that made the most structural sense rather than the order that was easiest to hear, because he had determined in the 4-hour between the clearing and the sitting room that she was not a person who needed information, softened into palatability, and that treating her as one would be a form of disrespect, dressed as consideration. He told her what wolves were. He told her what the gathering was. He told her what the color in his veins was, as much as he understood it, which was more than he had understood 2 days ago, and less than he would understand eventually. He told her the word, funfo, what the old text said, what the elders believed, what it meant, in the oldest understanding of the moon-blessed world, to be the unbound light. She listened. She did not interrupt. She did not perform shock, though the material warranted it. She listened with a particular quality of listening that he had come to associate with her, total, attending, building the picture from the inside out, the way she built everything, filing each piece in its accurate position, rather than the position that was most immediately comfortable. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "The warmth I felt through my palm." Tarch triggered it. "Yes, but I do not carry power, not in the way a wolf carries it. You carry," he paused, choosing, "the condition for it, the key to what was already there." She looked at her hands on her knees, the ordinary hands, the fieldwork calluses, "And the people in this world," she said, "the wolves, they will know what I am to you. The ones who were in the hall will tell the ones who were not." She looked up, "And that is dangerous." "It becomes dangerous," he said carefully, "when the people who hear it decide that the advantage of having you is worth the cost of taking you." She held this in the quiet way she held difficult data, not flinching from it, not rushing toward a conclusion about it, simply letting it be the true thing that it was. "Kiran," she said. "Kiran is the nearest example," he said. "He is not the only one. How many others? Unknown yet. The gathering ends in 2 days. The information will reach packs that were not represented here. Those packs will make their own calculations about me, about what you mean by any alpha, who can access your proximity." She was quiet. He watched her working through it, not the fear of it, the architecture of it, the way her mind built structures rather than reactions when it encountered new information. "It only works with you," she said. "The text suggests the catalyst is specific to one wolf, to the wolf the goddess selected across the calculations she made. So taking me does not give another alpha which you have. No, but they might not know that. Some will not. And some," he said, "will know it, not care, because controlling access to you controls the advantage regardless of whether they can replicate it." She looked at him. "They would use me as a piece in a larger game." "Yes, and you are telling me this," she said, "because you think I need to understand the BLURB before, because you deserve to understand it," he said. "Completely, without the parts that are convenient for me removed." She held his gaze for a long moment. "The convenient parts being," she said, "that the most straightforward way to keep me safe is to keep me close to you." "Yes, which also happens to be what your wolf wants." A pause, honest and clean. "Yes," he said. She looked away, not in dismissal, in the way she looked at the tree line when she was thinking, using the distance to give the thought room. "I appreciate the honesty," she said finally. "It is all I have to offer that is worth anything." She turned back. "I need time to think about what I want. You have it. That is not nothing," she said, "being given time. In a situation like this." "No," he said. It is not. She picked up the field notebook she had brought, not to write in, but as the physical anchor she apparently carried with her when the thinking was serious, the same way he carried the particular stillness that meant he was building something. "I'm not going to run," she said. "If that is what you are wondering." "I was not wondering." "You were," she said mildly. "You have been wondering since the clearing." He looked at her. The corner of her mouth moved. "I watch people," she said, "including you." He was quiet for a moment. "Then you know," he said, "that I would not hold you here. Whatever I want." "I know," she said. "That is why I'm not running." She slept. He did not. He sat in the north corridor chair outside the sitting room until the building had reached its deepest hour, and then he moved through the lodge with the quiet of his nature and the particular awareness that the shimmer in his forearm had taken on a new quality, not different in its presence, which was continuous and unchanged, but different in his relationship to it. He had named it now, given her the name for herself. And the naming had done something to the weight of it, the way naming a thing always shifted the weight of it, not lighter, not heavier, but differently distributed. He was aware of three things moving simultaneously. The first was the lodge around him, the gathered wolves in their rooms and their signed spaces, the night sentries at the perimeter, the particular texture of an old building holding 30-some dominant presences under one roof, in the final days of a gathering that had produced more significant events than any in recent memory. The second was her, the east wing. The light that was off now, the sleeping that he could infer from the quality of the building's silence in that direction, the breathing that was not audible at this distance but was present in the way she was always present in the lodge's architecture, in the fixed-point quality that had been orienting his wolf since the first night. The third was the information that was moving. He could not hear it. It was beyond the lodge's walls now, traveling through the network of pack communications that operated through a combination of modern channels and older ones, the phones and the encrypted messages and the older runner systems that some packs maintained on the basis that old methods had old reliability. But he could infer its movement, the way he inferred weather, from the conditions that produced it, from the direction it would naturally travel, from the packs it would reach, and the reception it would find there. He stood at the north window and looked at the tree line. The information would reach 3 packs before morning, probably 4. By the end of the following day, every wolf in the Northern Territory who maintained the connections these gatherings existed to maintain would have a version of what had happened on the clearing ground. What they would do with their version depended on who they were. The loyal packs, the ones with long-standing relationships to the Obsidian Pack, whose alphas had been in this building long enough to have direct knowledge, would sit with it, would wait, would send him the quiet signals that old alliances sent when they were affirming their position, without needing to make a production of the affirmation. The opportunistic ones, the Kiran variety, ambitious and fast-moving and constitutionally unable to watch something significant develop with, calculating their angle of approach, would move. And there was a third category that was smaller and older and more careful than either, and it was this category that Onyx was standing at the window thinking about at 3 in the morning, because the third category was the one his wolf understood at the level of instinct rather than calculation, the ones who had been waiting, not for this specific thing, for something like this, for any significant shift in the regional balance that could be used as a lever, if the lever was found at the right moment, in the right hands. These were not young, ambitious alphas who moved on impulse. These were older wolves with longer games, alphas who had spent years accumulating the conditions for an advantage and were disciplined enough to wait until the conditions aligned. He did not know yet who they were. He would know soon enough. Seal found him at the window at 4:15 with the expression of a man who had also not slept and had been productive about it. 3 messages since midnight, Seal said, low-voiced. Pack leaders who were not at the gathering, asking for information about the woman. Seal named them. 2 of the 3 were in the opportunistic category, younger leadership, fast-moving, the kind of packs that had been growing their territorial footprint aggressively over the past 5 years and had developed a habit of treating new variables as acquisition opportunities, expected, manageable. The third name gave him pause. Voss, Onyx said. Yes. Voss led the Ashen Moor pack from the Western Territory, a pack that had been in place for 4 generations, under the same bloodline, old in the way that carried weight rather than history, with an alpha who had been making decisions at the regional level for 30 years and who had developed those 30 years of reputation for identifying valuable things before other people understood they were valuable. What did the message say? That he would heard something significant had occurred at the gathering, and that he hoped the Obsidian pack was well, and that he would welcome a conversation at Onyx's convenience. Seal paused. In the old formal phrasing, Onyx looked at him. The old formal phrasing, Seal confirmed, that you use when you are making a formal inquiry under pack law. The formal inquiry under pack law was the mechanism that allowed one alpha to make a claim of interest in another pack's business, when the business in question had regional implications. It was rare. It was serious. It was not the language of opportunism. It was the language of someone who had received the information, had understood its full weight immediately, and had moved to establish a legal position before anyone else thought to. Voss had been awake when the information arrived. Voss had responded within the hour. He knows what she is, Onyx said. Or he knows enough, Seal said. Enough to know that formal interest is worth establishing before the situation develops further. Does he have text access? The old records. His bloodline goes back 4 generations in this territory. If anyone outside this gathering has access to the Ethonvel material, find out, Onyx said. Carefully. Seal nodded. There's something else. Onyx waited. The 2 from this gathering were in the hall during the shift. Who saw the full shimmer? Seal was precise in his phrasing. They had been in contact with their home packs since midnight. The messages are not encrypted. They went through the standard channels. I have had Dax monitoring. What did they send? Descriptions, Seal said. Very detailed ones. Of the color, of the intensity, of the connection to the woman. He paused. One of them used the phrase power without a ceiling. Onyx looked at the tree line. Power without a ceiling. He turned the phrase over. It was imprecise in the way that witness accounts were imprecise, built from the impression of an experience rather than its analysis, carrying the emotional weight of what it had felt like to stand on that cleared ground, rather than the technical weight of what had actually occurred. But imprecise did not mean inaccurate, and the impression that phrase described was not entirely wrong. He did not know his ceiling. He had run in the night forest and felt the depth of what his wolf had become, and he had not found the bottom of it. He was building the picture, incomplete still, requiring more data, requiring the kind of extended proximity and testing that a 2-day gathering in a lodge did not afford, but the portion of the picture he had was already outside any prior framework. Power without a ceiling. The wolves who heard that phrase would not all respond to it the same way. Most would be cautious. Appropriately cautious, the way Dominus were cautious around things that outranked them, not fearful, but measured, giving the thing its space, waiting to see how it developed, before deciding what it meant for their own positions. Some would not be cautious. Some would see a ceiling they could not locate as a challenge rather than a warning, would see the woman as the mechanism, regardless of what the text said about the specificity of the catalyst bond, and would calculate that control of the mechanism was worth the cost of attempting it. These were the wolves he needed to identify before they moved. I need the pack mapping, said. Every alpha in the northern and western territories, their current positions, their alliances, their outstanding grievances, everything Dax has. It is already being compiled. By morning, it will be ready. Onyx was quiet for a moment. And Kieran, said, where is he? In his room, Sale said. He has not communicated with his home pack since the clearing. A pause. I think he is regrouping. He will be embarrassed when the embarrassment reaches his pack. Yes, embarrassed young alphas are not always cautious young alphas. I know, Seal said. I will keep Ren on the east wing. Onyx nodded once. They stood at the window together in the quiet way of 2 people who had been in proximity for long enough that silence was one of the available instruments. Then Seal said, she took it well. Last night, yes, the full truth, in one sitting. She took it precisely, Onyx said, which is different from well. Well implies it was comfortable. It was not. She was accurate about it. Seal absorbed this. Is she going to stay? She said she was not going to run. That's not the same question. No, Onyx said. It is not. He looked at the forearm where the trace ran its continuous, quiet line beneath the skin. The shimmer of the clearing was gone. Returned to the resting state, the permanent trace, the thing that the first touch had established, and no subsequent distance had diminished. She had asked for time to decide what she wanted. He had given it. When the gathering ends in 2 days, he said, she cannot go back to her ordinary life without protection. She does not know that world yet, the one that now knows she exists. He paused. She needs to understand that before she decides. You are going to tell her. This morning. And if she decides she wants to leave anyway, Onyx looked at the tree line. Then she leaves, he said. With the obsidian pack's protection following her at a distance, she can tolerate until the situation stabilizes or she changes her mind. He paused. Whichever comes first. Seal was quiet for a moment. You would do that, he said. Not a question, simply the noting of something. I said I would not hold her. You said it to her, Seal said. I am noting that you mean it. Onyx said nothing. Outside, the tree line held its occupied dark, full of things that lived in it and moved through it, and conducted their lives in it without reference to the politics of the building that stood at its edge. The northern forest did not care about pack law or regional governance or the information currently moving through wolf networks at the speed of significant things. The forest simply was. He had always found this useful to remember. She found him at breakfast. Not the other way. She came to him. Crossing the east dining room with the unhurried directness that was her natural register, and setting her plate across from his, without asking, and sitting as though the geometry of it had been established, and required no further negotiation. He looked at her. She looked back. 3 things, she said. All right. 1. I am not leaving. She said it with the flat finality of someone who had worked through the decision in the night, and arrived at its conclusion, and was now simply reporting the result. I understand what that means. I understand the people who are going to treat me as a variable, and I understand what it costs to be under your protection, and I understand that I am choosing it with incomplete information, because the complete information will not exist until the situation develops. Further, and waiting for complete information is sometimes the same as making the worst available choice by default. He held her gaze. 2, she said. I need ongoing honesty, not managed honesty, not the version of the truth that has been curated for what you think I can handle, the actual truth, as you have it, as it develops. Yes, he said. 3, she looked at her coffee for a moment and then back at him. What happened on that clearing? What I saw when you shifted? She paused. That was because of me. Yes. The shimmer, the power. That is what my proximity does to you. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. In her expression was something he had not seen in its full form before. Not the scientist's precision, not the field observer attending, but something more interior, something she had not had the framework for, until the conversation in the sitting room had given her the language to approach it. That is a significant responsibility, she said. It is. I want you to know that I understand that. She met his eyes. Not as a burden, as a weight that I am choosing to carry. That is different. He looked at her across the table, at the ordinary hands in the field notebook in her jacket pocket, and the quality of her that had been pressing down on the world since before she arrived here, looking for the depth beneath it. Yes, he said. It is. She picked up her fork. Now tell me about Voss, she said. He looked at her. I heard Saga in the corridor at 4 this morning, she said, without looking up from her plate. The name meant something to you. I could hear it in the silence after. He was quiet for a moment. You watch, she said. I listened too, she said. What about Voss? He told her. She listened, and her expression was the expression of a person receiving information about a landscape they had just decided to commit to. Not fear, not performance, the honest, open attention of someone who was going to need to know every feature of the terrain they had chosen to stand in. Around them, the dining room filled with wolves who oriented toward the north where Onyx sat. Freya did not orient. She chose. She kept her eyes on him, and she listened, and the morning light came through the east window and fell across the table between them and caught, briefly, the trace. His forearm where the shimmer lived its continuous quiet life beneath the skin. She noted it. She said nothing about it, but the corner of her mouth moved slightly, and then she returned to her breakfast, and he understood that the noting was its own kind of language, precise, unhurried, belonging entirely to itself. The hunters were moving in the territory beyond the lodge's walls. Inside them, a woman who had been the woman who knew nothing was building the map of the world she had walked into, feature by feature, with the patient methodology of someone who had learned that you understood and escape best by standing in it. She was standing in it. She had chosen to. The rest, Onyx thought, looking at the shimmer in his arm, and the woman across the table, and the frost-edged tree line beyond the window, would have to be met as it came. He had stopped expecting to be ready for it. He had decided, somewhere between the night forest and the clearing ground, and the sitting room and this breakfast table, that ready was not the operative condition. Present was. He was present. So was she. That was, for now, sufficient. Elder Wynn had not slept in 2 days. This was not distress. It was the condition she worked best in, the particular sharpened clarity that came when the ordinary needs of the body were subordinated to the demands of a problem that would not wait for them to be met. She had spent 40 years reading everything the Pax had produced across every lineage that would grant her access, and she had learned in those 40 years that the most important material never announced itself. It arrived sideways, hidden in administrative records, tucked inside the legal documentation of boundary disputes that had been resolved 3 centuries ago and had no visible relevance to anything currently living. The archive room had been hers since the clearing. Aldrich had insured it, had quietly redirected the gathering's members away from the ground floor corridor with the practiced authority of a host who understood that certain work required uninterrupted space, and that providing that space was itself a form of governance. She had 6 volumes open on the long table. She had the small leather-bound text from the Greyholt collection at her right hand, where it had been since she would first placed it there 2 mornings ago. She had the cotton gloves on and the lamp angled precisely, and the magnifying instrument positioned over a passage in the oldest of the 6 volumes that she had been reading and rereading for the past 3 hours, with the growing certainty of someone who has found the thing they were looking for, and needs to be sure before they say so. She was sure. Onyx came to the archive room at 9 in the morning with Freya beside him. Wynn had expected him. She had not expected the woman, and for a moment she simply looked, not at Onyx, at Freya, with the particular quality of attention that 81 years of reading old texts about things that had not happened yet produced when those things finally arrived in the room. Freya looked back. Wynn decided. She approved. "She knows," Onyx said. "I can see that she knows," Yen said. "Come in. Close the door." They came in. The door closed. Freya looked at the table, at the 6 open volumes, and the small leather-bound text, and the organized evidence of 40 years of a scholar who had been building toward this moment across more time than the moment itself would take, with the expression of someone who recognized, in the arrangement of another person's materials, the methodology of a mind that worked the way their own did. Wynn noticed this too. "Sit," she said. "Both of you." They sat across from her, and Wynn looked at them across the table, with the 6 open volumes between them, and thought that if she had harbored any remaining doubt about what the old text described, the sight of these 2 people sitting together in this room, the quality of the air between them, way the trace in his forearm caught the lamplight even at this distance, the way she sat with the particular grounded attention of someone who had chosen to be exactly where they were, would have resolved it. She opened the oldest volume to the passage she had been reading for 3 hours. "I need to show you something," she said, "before I explain it." The oldest volume in Ashford Lodge's archive was not the oldest document the archive contained. Documents survived independently of the volumes they were eventually bound into, and the practice of binding had come later than the practice of recording, which was itself later than the practice of remembering. The oral tradition that existed in the Pax before written language, that existed in the blood before oral tradition, had existed in the wolf before everything. The volume Wynn opened was 430 years old. The passage she had found was not on any index page. It was in the marginalia, the handwritten additions that scribes and readers and subsequent keepers of the volume had added in the white space alongside the main text across 4 centuries of the volume passing through different hands. The main text was a formal record of the first regional gathering, the original convening of the Northern Pacts, the founding document of the governance structure that these gatherings maintained. Standard historical material, well known. Cited regularly in pack law proceedings. The marginalia were not standard. They were in 4 distinct hands, written across what appeared to be at least a century of editions, each one in the old tongue, each one brief, each one occupying the narrow white space beside a specific passage in the main text is, though the writers had been responding to something in the text that the text itself did not make visible. Wynne had found the connection between the marginalia and the small gray-hole text at 4 in the morning. She showed them now. The first hand, she said, pointing to the oldest of the 4, cramped, urgent, the writing of someone working quickly, translates as, the design was complete before the gathering was called. The gathering was not the beginning. It was the first visible step of something that began long before. She moved her finger to the second hand. We have looked for the Ethanvel in the bloodlines. We were wrong to look there. They do not carry the mark in blood. They carry it in their presence, in the living fact of what they are. The mark is in what happens around them, not in them. The third hand was more careful, measured, the writing of someone who had time to be deliberate. 3 generations since the last confirmed account, the wolf who received was never identified publicly. The elders of his time kept the record separate to protect the catalyst from the politics of the era. This was wise. The politics of that era were not kind to useful things. The 4th hand was the most recent, no more than 150 years old, the script slightly more modern in its formation. I have read every account available to me. The pattern is consistent. The catalyst is always placed at the intersection of the wolf's greatest need and the goddess's longest view, never early. Never when the wolf is young and the power manageable. Always when the wolf has reached the full development of what they are naturally, and the goddess determines that the natural ceiling is insufficient for what is coming. Wynne closed her hand over the passage. The room was quiet. Freya said, "What is coming?" Wynne looked at her. "That," she said, "is the part that no account specifies. The goddess's longest view is not legible from inside the timeline she is working with. We can see that the catalyst is triggered when something is coming. We cannot see what the something is from where we stand, but it is consistent," Freya said, "across every account. Every account I can locate. Yes, the catalyst appears when the wolf's natural capacity is no longer sufficient for what the world is about to require of them." Wynne looked at her steadily. "That is a precise reading." "I work with land," Freya said. "Old land. Land that carries the record of everything that happened in it, in its layers, in the sediment, in the root systems, in the way water moves through it. You learn to read the record backward from what is present to understand what produced it." She looked at the volume. "This is the same methodology." Onyx was looking at Freya with the expression he had been wearing with increasing frequency over the past 3 days, the expression of a man whose picture of something was continuously being revised toward greater accuracy. Wynne reached for the Greyhold text. She opened it to a page near the back that she had not shown the council, a page she had found at 3 in the morning when connections had begun resolving, and she had gone back to the beginning of the small volume with new eyes. "There is a second section," she said, after the passage I translated for the council, shorter, in a different hand than the rest of the text, added later by someone who had access to the same source material, but was writing from a different position. She translated it slowly. "The bond between the wolf and the Yathonavel is not diminished by distance. It does not require constant proximity to maintain what has been established. The first touch triggers the unlock. Subsequent contact deepens it. But the opening, once made, does not close. This is important for the protection of the catalyst. They are not a resource that requires confinement. Confining them defeats the design. The goddess did not create the Yathonavel to be held still. She created them to be present in the world, living. The power the wolf receives is not from the catalyst's location. It is from the bond itself, which is woven now into what the wolf is. The catalyst is not the source. The catalyst was the door. The wolf is what walked through it." Wynne set the translation down. Frey was looking at the table. Onyx was looking at Freya. She is not the source, he said, quietly, working it out in language the way he worked things out, precisely, without the comfort of leaving it abstract. No, Wynne said. What was triggered in me on the clearing ground, the power of that shift, was yours, Wynne said. It was always yours. She unlocked the door. You walk through it. What is on the other side of that door belongs to you, not to her proximity. Onyx was still. Freya looked up. Her expression was the expression of someone processing a significant revision to their own understanding. He does not need me close, he said, to have what was unlocked. The bond deepens with contact, Yin said carefully. What he has now will develop further through continued proximity, but the foundation is established. The unlock is permanent. Freya was quiet for a moment. Then I am not a dependency. No, Wynne said. He is not stronger because I am next to him, and weaker when I am not. The bond is altered his baseline, Wynne said. The baseline remains regardless of where you are. Contact develops it further, but you are not the condition of his power. You are the condition of its beginning. Something moved through Freya's expression, a complex thing, layered, carrying more than one feeling, moving in more than one direction. That matters, she said. I thought it would, Wynne said. She looked at Onyx. He was looking at his forearm, at the trace, quiet in the lamplight, the permanent record of the door that had opened and would not close. You did not know that, Freya said to him. Before this morning, I knew the text said the bond was permanent, he said. I did not know it distinguished between the opening and the ongoing development. Does it change anything for you? He looked at her. It clarifies, he said. It does not change. She held his gaze. Good, she said. And the word carried the weight of something she had been carrying quietly. The question of whether she was necessary in a way that made freedom impossible, being set down. Wynne let them have the moment. Then she said, there is one more thing. In the marginalia. She turned the oldest volume to a second marked passage, further into the document, near the final pages of the formal record where the original scribes had recorded the territorial boundaries agreed upon at the first gathering. In the margin, in the first hand, the cramped urgent writing, was a single line. She translated it. The goddess does not place the Ethonvel where the wolf already is. She places them where the wolf needs to be. The room held this. Outside, the lodge continued its morning. The gathering's final formal session was scheduled for the afternoon. The closing procedures, the documented agreements, the formal farewell that ended these events and released the assembled wolves back to their territories. In 2 hours, Voss's formal inquiry under pack law would require a response. In 2 days, the lodge would empty, and the Northern Territory would reconstitute itself around the new information it was still processing. Freya looked at the margin note for a long time. She places them where the wolf needs to be, she repeated. Yes, Wynne said. The land assessment contract, Freya said. The road closure sent me off my original route, the wrong entrance. She paused. Mrs. Harrell's directions to the east corridor, the goddess, Wynne said, works in circumstances. Freya was quiet. I thought I was lost, she said. Wynne looked at her across the 6 open volumes and the 4 centuries of marginalia, and the small leather-bound text that had been hidden inside a boundary record, for reasons that were now, finally, legible. You were found, she said. Those are different things. The lamp burned steadily. The archive room held its accumulated silence, 300 years of it, pressed into the stone and the timber and the shelves of documents that had been keeping the world's oldest information safe across every generation that had passed through, without knowing they needed. Freya Callahan sat in the middle of it with her hands on the table, the ordinary fieldwork hands, the ones that had touched a wolf's arm in a hall full of witnesses, and started something the moon goddess had been building toward, across a calculation that had begun before any of them were born. And she was very still, not lost, found. The difference she was beginning to understand was everything. They left the archive room together, and did not speak until they had put 2 corridors between themselves and the door. Then Freya stopped. She stopped in the middle of the north corridor with the morning light coming through the high window at the far end, and her hands at her sides and her expression carrying the layered thing it had been carrying since the archive room, since you were found. And Onyx stopped beside her and waited. because he had learned in the past 4 days that her stillnesses were not empty, that she was doing her most significant work in them, and that interrupting them was the wrong instrument. She said, "The mate bond." "Yes, this is not that." "No." She turned to look at him. "Explain the difference. Not from the text, from your own understanding." He considered this, the distinction between the received knowledge and the lived one, the difference between what Wynn's translations had given him and what the past 4 days had given him, in the place that was not text at all. "The mate bond," he said, "is a recognition, wolf to wolf, an identification of a specific person as the complement of everything you are. It arrives as certainty, sudden, complete, not built toward but received. It is about the wolf finding its counterpart, and this is," he paused, discarding 2 versions before finding the one he could stand behind. "The mate bond is the wolf finding its home. This is the wolf finding its full self. Those are different directions." She held this. "The mate bond is about another person," she said slowly. "This is about you. What you carry, what the Ethanvel is. It does not complete me in the way a mate completes a wolf. It does not fill an absence." He looked at the trace in his forearm, the permanent, quiet shimmer of it. "It reveals presence that was always there, that I have always been, and could not fully access, until the door." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "But it is not only that, is it?" It was not a question. She had 14 pages of notes and a mind built for landscapes, and she had been watching him for 4 days with the precision of someone who was going to arrive at the accurate version eventually, regardless of what was offered in its place. He looked at her. "No," he said, "it is not only that." They went outside, not the cleared ground, the path along the lodge's eastern face that ran parallel to the tree line, narrow and frost-edged and empty at this hour, with the forest close enough on one side that the cold coming off it was a distinct presence, and the lodge wall close enough on the other that the accumulated warmth of the building's 300 years was also present. Between the two, that was where they walked. He had not planned to say what he said next. He had built his response to most of the past 4 days' events with the careful architecture that was his nature, identified the variables, assessed the picture, determined the accurate version, and offered it. This was different. This arrived without the architecture, the way the shimmer had arrived in his veins without his choosing, from the interior, from below the level of construction, from the place where the wolf made its assessments and delivered them directly, without passing them through the editing that 12 years of leadership had built into his every public expression. "In 12 years, he said, I have not allowed myself to need anything." She said nothing. She walked beside him, and she listened, not as philosophy, not as discipline for its own sake. As a function, the pack requires an alpha who is not compromised by need. Need is a leverage point. Need is a vector for pressure that can be applied in ways that affect decisions that should not be affected by personal variables. He paused. "I understood this at 23. I built accordingly." "You closed the doors," she said. "I closed the doors. All of them. Enough of them," he said, "that the ones I did not close did not matter, because everything significant was behind the ones I did." She walked beside him, the frost-edged path, the cold from the forest and the warmth from the wall. "And then," she said, "and then a woman walked through the wrong door and touched my arm, and the color that had never existed in my veins existed in my veins, and my wolf went still for the first time in 12 years of never being still." He said it with flat accuracy of a man reporting a fact he has spent 3 days accepting, not managed, not held. Still, she was quiet. "That is not only the Ethanvel bond," he said. "The bond is the mechanism. It does not account for all of it." She stopped walking. He stopped beside her. She turned to look at him with the expression she wore when she was arriving at the accurate version of something, and was deciding whether to say it or let it remain in the space between them, where it already existed and did not require language. She decided to say it. "You were going to stay at a distance," she said. "If it had only been the bond, the power, the shimmer, you would have managed that. You have been managing things your whole adult life." She held his gaze. "You sat down at my table. Yes, that was not the bond." "No," he said. "That was you," she said. Yes, the word landed between them and settled there with the particular weight of honest things. She turned back to the path and began walking again, and he walked beside her, and the silence between them was the kind that had stopped being empty some days ago and was now simply the form that certain things took when words were insufficient to carry their full weight, and both people present understood this. She stopped again at the corner where the path met the tree line. She turned to face him fully. "I need to tell you something," she said, "from my side, because you have been precise with me, and I am going to be precise back." He waited. "I have spent my professional life in landscapes," she said. "Old ones. Places where the weight of what happened in them is still present in the soil. You can feel it through your boots, if you are paying attention, if you are the kind of person who presses down looking for the depth." She paused. "I have been that kind of person my entire life, and it has cost me, because most people do not press down. Most people move across the surface and call it understanding, and they are not wrong, exactly, but they are shallow. And I have never been able to be shallow, even when shallow would have been considerably easier." He was watching her. "What I felt through my palm when I touched your arm," she said, "was not just warmth, not just the current. It was weight, in the same way old land has weight. The accumulated depth of something that has been exactly what it is across a very long time." She met his eyes. "I have been looking for weight my whole life, in the ground, in the work. In every landscape I have stood in." She paused. "I did not expect to find it in a person." Wind from the tree line moved between them. "And now that you have," he said. "Now that I have," she said, "I am not going to perform confusion about it for the convenience of everyone who would find it more manageable if I did not know my own mind." Something moved through his expression, the thing that was not quite a smile but had been traveling in its direction since the first morning, closer now than it had ever been to actually arriving. "You know your mind," he said. I know my mind," she said. "I chose to stay. I am telling you that is not only because of the danger of leaving. I am telling you that I am choosing towards something, not just away from something." She looked at him steadily. "That distinction matters to me." He looked at her for a long moment. "It matters to me," he said, "more than I have the right words for." "Then we are in the same position," she said, "which is a reasonable place to start." She extended her hand, not the reflexive reach of a stumble, nothing accidental about it, nothing that had not been entirely, deliberately chosen. She held her hand out between them, palm up, an offering rather than a grasp, and she looked at him with the full tenting clarity of someone who was doing exactly what they meant to do, and knew it, and was not going to pretend otherwise. He looked at her hand. He looked at her, and he took it. Difference from the hall was not in the intensity, it was in the direction. In the hall, the shimmer had moved through him in the traveling wave of something triggered, the key finding the lock, the door swinging open, the cascade of a mechanism doing what it had been built to do from the outside in. It had happened to him. It had been extraordinary. It had been, in the most accurate sense, beyond his architecture. This was from the inside out. The warmth began in his chest, in the wolf, in the deepest register of it, in the place that had been still since the first touch, and was now in response to the chosen contact, the deliberate contact made with full understanding on both sides, doing something new. Not still, not the ease of stillness. Something that was the opposite of stillness in the best possible way, awake, moving, the wolf not suppressed and not resting, but fully, completely present in the way that things are present when they have found their correct position and every part of the system recognizes it. The shimmer came up through him, and it was not the trace, not the resting thread, it was the full expression of it, the dark moonlit luminescence moving from the point of her hand into his, and up through his arm and into his chest, and he felt it arrive there with the particular sensation of something slotting into a place that had been exactly that shape all along. He looked at their joined hands. Her hand in the daylight was ordinary. No shimmer, no trace, no evidence of anything moving in it. Ethonvel carried nothing visible in themselves. The text had said it, and the evidence had confirmed it every day she would been in this lodge. The shimmer was all his. It ran from the joined point of their hands to his elbow, and above it, visible through his sleeve in the thin frost-edged morning light, and he watched it, and understood, fully, in his body, and not just in his building of the picture, what the text had meant. She was the door. He was what had walked through it. The power deepening now, in this chosen contact, was his power deepening. The bond developing further was his bond, his wolf's bond, his nature's bond, the permanent woven thing that the first touch had established, and every subsequent proximity had been feeding. She was the condition of its beginning. He was everything that had walked through the condition. They were not the same thing. They were not separate things. They were, in the vocabulary, the old text had reached for, and the modern language did not have a clean word for, a completed circuit. She felt the warmth through their joined hands. Knew she felt it. Her expression said so. The slight opening of it, the way the field scientist's precision softened at the edges, into something more interior, something that belonged to the person rather than the methodology. "There it is," she said quietly. "Yes," he said. "It is different from before. You are not stopping a fall," he said. "Neither am I." She looked at their hands. "What does it feel like, from your side?" He thought about the night forest, about the depth of the whirl at 4 legs, about the strength beneath the strength, and the ground more legible, and the stars very cold and very clear, above the gap in the canopy. "Like understanding," he said, "what I was built for." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "That is not a small thing." "No," he said, "it is not." She turned her hand in his, not to release, to shift the grip, the deliberate repositioning of someone settling into something, rather than preparing to leave it. Her fingers wrapped around his. The shimmer deepened, not in intensity, which was already full, but in quality, the way a sound deepens. When you stop hearing it as sound and begin hearing it as music, when the thing that was always there reveals what it has always been. He held her hand. She held his. The frost-edged path, the cold from the forest, and the warmth from the wall, the trace in his veins blazing its dark moonlit truth to the morning air. The bond had always been real. Now it was known, by both of them. Together, in the deliberate chosen way of two people who had looked at the full weight of something and decided that the weight was not a reason to set it down. "Not a mate bond," she said finally. "No," he said, "something older, something that was built before the mate bond had a name," he said, "before the first gathering, before the first pack." He looked at the shimmer in his forearm. Before the first wolf understood what it was. She looked at the shimmer too. "The goddess's design," she said. "Yes, we are very small pieces of a very long plan. Yes." A pause. "I find that," she looked for the word, and he watched her find it with the precision she brought to everything. "Appropriate," she said, "for something this significant. It should be bigger than us. It would be frightening if it were only us." He looked at her. "It is frightening," he said, "being only us." She met his eyes. "Yes," she said, "that part is terrifying." "Yes." "Good," she said, and her grip on his hand shifted again, not tightening, not releasing, settling. "Terrifying things are worth the most." He said nothing. He held her hand on the frost-edged path between the old lodge and the old forest, with the shimmer moving through his veins in its dark moonlit circulation, and he understood, in the wolf, in the bone, in the place below architecture and below discipline and below 12 years of closed doors, that he had walked through the door. He was not going back through it. He had no interest in going back through it. The morning held them. The gathering ended on schedule. Aldrich closed the final session with the 20 years of practiced authority that made endings look like completions rather than conclusions. The formal agreements signed, the boundary documentation witnessed, the diplomatic architecture of the Northern Territory, reassembled into the functional order that these gatherings existed to maintain. The wolves began to leave. Not all at once. The departures staggered through the afternoon and into the early evening, packs collecting their members and their vehicles and moving back into the network of the territory. The way water moved back into its channels when the flood that had gathered it receded. The hosting pack's staff worked the lodge back toward its ordinary configuration, removing the formal session furniture, banking the great hall's fires to their maintenance level, returning the building to the particular settled state of a place that has held a large thing and is now returning to its own dimensions. By 7 in the evening, the lodge held 9 wolves, the Obsidian Pack's inner circle. Aldrich and 2 of his seniors. Wynne, who had requested and received permission to remain for another day's work in the archive room, and Freya. Onyx had told her the gathering's end would change the landscape. He had not told her how fast. CL came to them at 8. They were in the upper library, the chairs by the window, frost-edged tree line holding its occupied, dark outside, the lamp on the side table providing the particular quality of enclosed light that made a small room feel like it was keeping something safe. She had her notebook open, but had not been writing. He had been watching the tree line with the attending quality that had become, over the past 4 days, less about surveillance and more about simply occupying the space with the full presence that Vel Bond had opened in him. CL came through the door without knocking, because CL had not needed to knock in 9 years. His expression was the expression of a man delivering information he had been hoping not to have to deliver. "Boss," he said. Onyx was on his feet before the second word. Outside the perimeter, at the perimeter, 3 vehicles, 12 wolves. CL's voice was level. "They came through the north approach road. They were not on our watch list for tonight. Dax picked them up 6 minutes ago. Voss himself. In the second vehicle, 12. Onyx looked at Seal. "Not a conversation." "No," Seal said. "Not 12 wolves for a conversation." Freya had closed her notebook and was standing. Not in the scattered way of someone reacting, in the deliberate way of someone who had been told what the landscape looked like and was now moving through it. "The 2 packs that sent messages at midnight," she said. "Are they with him?" Seal looked at her, and then at Onyx. Onyx gave him nothing. Let him answer directly, because she was asking directly, and she had earned the directness. "We do not know yet," Seal said to her. "The north road has tree cover. Axe can see the vehicles but not the full numbers. So it may be more than 12. It may be more than 12. She was quiet for a half-second. Then, "What do you need from me?" Onyx looked at her. "The east wing," he said. "3rd floor. Ren is already there. He will stay with you. Do not come down until I come for you. And if you do not come, I will come." She held his gaze. He held hers. The shimmer in his forearm was doing what it did when she was close, and he was building towards something. Not the blaze, not yet, but the current, the warmth, moving upward from his wrist toward his elbow, with the quiet, purposeful energy of something that understood what was about to happen, even if the man it lived in was still making the final assessments. "All right," she said. She did not say, "Be careful." She understood him well enough by now to know that careful was not the instrument required, and that offering it would have been the wrong note. She held his gaze for 1 more second, the deliberate, attending quality of it, the chosen looking that she always did, and then she went. The library door closed behind her. He turned to Seal. "There is Dax now. North fence. Aldrich's 2 seniors are with him. Get them back. This is Obsidian business." Seal was already moving. The north approach road met the lodge's outer boundary, at a wooden gate that the hosting pack maintained for vehicle access during gatherings. The gate was open now, had been open all day for departing wolves, and through it, in the dark of the north road under the tree canopy, the headlights of 3 vehicles were visible at the edge of the lamp's reach. They had stopped short of the gate, which meant they were waiting, which meant Fa was making a point about the conversation he intended to have, formal enough to pause at the boundary, present enough in numbers that the pause was not mistakable for hesitation. Onyx walked to the gate. He heard the vehicle door open before he reached it. Voss came around the front of the second vehicle into the reach of the lamp, a man in his mid-60s, gray through the hair and the short beard, built along the lines of someone who had been large in youth and had refined rather than diminished with age. He moved with the particular economy of a wolf who has stopped needing to demonstrate anything long time ago and had arrived at the kind of authority that existed independently of performance. He had been alpha of the Ashenmore pack for 30 years. He looked at Onyx across the gate. "Onyx," he said. "Voss." Onyx stopped at the gate's near side. "You sent a formal inquiry." I had not yet responded. "The formal inquiry was for the gathering," Voss said. "The gathering has ended. I am here now as a direct conversation with 12 wolves. I came a long way Voss said with the neutral quality of a man for whom long distances were simply part of the calculation rather than an argument. "I prefer not to travel without adequate company." Onyx looked at him across the gate's wooden bar. He had respected Voss from a distance for years. The length of the game he played, the patience of it, the discipline of someone who had spent 30 years not overreaching and had accumulated, through that restraint, a position in the regional balance that was not dominant in the way youth and aggression built dominance, but load-bearing in the way that old foundations were load-bearing. That respect was present now, but beneath it was something else. "The woman is under my protection," Onyx said. "That was declared before this gathering's witnesses. It is on record." "I know," Voss said. "Then you know this conversation has a limited range." "I know what the declaration covers under current pack law," Voss said. "I also know what it does not cover, and what it does not cover is the question of what she is." He paused. "What she is has regional implications, implications that extend beyond the Obsidian Pack's territory. You know this. I know what you believe the implications are." "I know what the Ython-Vel texts say the implications are," Voss said. "Yes, Onyx. I have access to the secondary sources. I have had access to them for 8 years. He said it without pride, as information, not display. "I have been waiting for 8 years for this event to occur. I knew it would occur. I knew from the texts that when it did, Wolf involved would need support that his own pack, however strong, was not structured to provide alone." "Or," Onyx said, "you had been waiting for 8 years for this event to occur, and have arrived tonight to ensure that the resulting advantage does not consolidate in a single pack without your involvement." A silence. Voss looked at him. "Both of those things," he said, "can be true simultaneously." "They can," Onyx said. "The question is which one brought you to my gate at 8 in the evening with 12 wolves instead of a letter?" From somewhere behind the second vehicle, in the dark of the tree cover beyond the lamp's reach, something moved. Onyx heard it before he saw it. The compressed sound of bodies moving through space with deliberate quiet. The particular quality of wolves were trying not to be heard by human ears, and did not understand they were not dealing with human ears. He counted without looking. 4. Moving along the fence line to his left, 2 more toward the east face. Not 12. More than 12. The vehicles on the road had been the display. The ones in the trees were the actual conversation. He looked at Voss. Voss's expression had not changed, which told him everything about whether Voss had known, and the answer was yes, Voss had known, and it held the eye contact and the reasonable-sounding words while the woods behind him did what the woods behind him were doing. 30 years, Onyx said quietly, and you make this choice. The choice, Voss said, and something in his voice had changed, not harder, not threatening, but final. The way a door closing was final, is about what the Ython-Vel bond means for the next generation of this territory. Not for you, not for your pack, for all of us. The power that was displayed on that clearing ground, we cannot allow it to exist in one pack's hands without governance. Governance, Onyx said. She is not your property, Voss said. The bond is yours, the power is yours, but she is a person, and a person cannot be a pack asset regardless of what she means to your wolf. I agree with that completely, Onyx said, which is why I have not made her one. The other packs are coming regardless, Voss said. Set tonight or tomorrow or next week. The information is moving, and it will reach wolves who are less interested in conversation than I am. I am offering you a structure, a governance framework that protects her from those who will not come with 12 vehicles, and a reasonable argument. The Ashenmore Pack's reach covers 3 territories. The alliances I can bring to this. Something hit the east fence, not Voss's wolves. New wolves. The compressed sound of a larger group moving fast through the northern tree line, in the direction they had come from. The sound of vehicles cutting lights somewhere further up the road. The sound that Onyx's wolf had been registering for the past 90 seconds as information he had been building toward a conclusion about, and had now reached. The 2 packs that had sent messages at midnight, they had not come with Voss. They had followed Voss at a distance sufficient to be deniable, and had used his arrival to fix the lodge's attention at the gate while they moved through the tree cover on the east side. The east side, where the third floor of the east wing was, where Ren was, where Freya was. The shimmer did not travel this time. It arrived. Every vein from his right hand to his shoulder blazed with a dark moonlit luminescence simultaneously. Not the tide, not the wave, not the careful announcing approach of the power finding its range. It came with the totality of something that had stopped being careful because careful was no longer the instrument. Voss saw it and took one step back from the gate. Even Voss. Onyx did not go over the gate. He went through it. The wooden bar splintered at the contact point, and he was past it before the pieces reached the ground, moving across the lodge's perimeter at a speed that the wolves in the trees had not anticipated, could not have anticipated, because the speed was not the speed of a wolf who was running to the thing. It was the speed of a wolf who was already there. He shifted on the east lawn. No clearing, no distance, no ceremony of it. He shifted mid-stride with the efficiency of a body that had given itself to the change so completely that the change and the movement were simultaneous. The obsidian wolf arriving on the east lawn while the last memory of the man was still completing the gesture that had started on the north road. The shimmer was already everywhere, full, blazing, not the display of the clearing ground. The clearing had been a demonstration, controlled, 3/4 of what he was. This was the remainder. This was what he had not released on the clearing, because releasing it fully in response to Curran's posturing would have been disproportionate, and he was still, even in that moment, a wolf who understood proportion. Proportion had left him. The east lawn held 3 wolves in their shifted forms, advance guard of the 2 opportunist packs, who had come over the fence in the belief that the gate was occupying the lodge's attention, and who were now standing in the full reach of the dark moonlit shimmer, at a distance of 15 meters from the thing that was generating it. They did not advance. They could not advance. This was not a figure of speech. The specific pressure of what the obsidian wolf was on the east lawn, fully expressed, with the Ethan Velbon running at the depth that 4 days of proximity and deliberate contact had built it to, with the shimmer blazing through every strand of black fur in the living celestial circulation that the goddess had built into him across the calculation that had begun before he was born. This pressure was not metaphor. It was physical. It moved outward from him in the way that a fire moved heat outward, not touching, not directing, simply present, the ambient reality of something that was operating at a level that the bodies around it registered before their minds could instruct them to stand firm. The 3 shifted wolves lay down, not in submission, or not only in submission, in the involuntary recognition that every living thing with animal instinct made in the presence of something that was not a threat, but was a fact, the way dogs lay down before lightning, the way birds fell silent before the weather changed, the way things knew. They lay down on the east lawn, and the shimmer moved over them in its dark moonlit circulation, and kept moving. There were 7 more wolves in the east wing. He knew before he reached the building. His senses at this level of expression were not the familiar sharp and human of his ordinary shifted state, but something else entirely, something that processed the world in layers, rather than impressions, the full architecture of every living thing, in a 300-meter radius, legible and precise. 3 in the lodge. Ground floor, moving toward the east staircase, 4 on the upper floors, moving in 2 pairs, 1 toward the second floor rooms, 1 toward the third floor rooms. He went in through the east wall's exterior door, the same side entrance Freya had used on the first night, the door off the eastern corridor, and the corridor received him the way the east lawn had received him, the dark moonlit light, coming off his fur casting the old wood and iron fixtures in a new illumination, the shadows driven back not by brightness, but by the particular quality of the shimmer's light, which was not bright in the way fire was bright, but present in the way moonlight was present. Everywhere, sourceless, owned by no single direction. The 3 wolves on the ground floor registered his entry and made the same choice the east lawn wolves had made. They were against the wall before he had completed the first turn in the corridor. He moved past them. The staircase, the second floor. Pair were mid-stairs when he reached the bottom, 2 wolves in human form, moving with the careful speed of people who had been told to get to the 3rd floor and had no information about what was currently in the corridor below them. They stopped. They saw the shimmer. One of them said something. Word, low, in a language he recognized as the Eastern dialect, and the word translated, roughly, as impossible. He moved past them. Third floor. The door to the third-floor corridor was closed. On the other side of it were 4 wolves. They arrived first, and had more time to commit to the position. He could hear them, not their voices, which were controlled, but their weight on the old floorboards, their breathing, the specific compression of bodies that were prepared to hold a position. He could hear Ren. Ren was between them and the last door on the left, and he was holding the position. With the steady quality of a wolf who has stood in difficult gaps before, and had developed a philosophy about the holding that kept the fear from being relevant. He could hear Freya, inside the last door on the left. Standing, not sitting. She had not been sitting since Cale came to the library, he suspected. Standing near the door, which was the position of a person who had decided that whatever was on the other side of it, they were going to face it. He opened the third-floor door. The corridor was not long. 4 wolves and Ren in it, and the last door on the left at the far end, and the shimmer filling the space when he came through the door, the way a tide filled an inlet, not violently, not in a rush, but completely, until there was no part of the space that was not inside it. Ren saw him in the particular quality of his expression. Relief, underneath the professional steadiness, was expression of a wolf who had been holding something alone, and had just been relieved. The 4 wolves against Ren looked at the obsidian wolf in the corridor. The obsidian wolf whose fur carried the dark moonlit shimmer in every strand, blazing at full expression, the goddess's own color running through the original dark in the living celestial circulation that the old text had described, and that the modern world had not seen until 4 days ago. The wolf whose power had no ceiling any of them could locate. The wolf who was looking at them with a stillness that was not the stillness of control, but the stillness of something that had found its correct position and would not be moved from it. All 4 of them put their backs to the wall. He moved past them. He stopped at the last door on the left. He shifted. The man came back. The shimmer retreated to the trace, the permanent faint thread in his forearm, the resting state, the thing that had not departed since the first touch, and never would. He stood at the door. He knocked. 3 seconds. The door opened. Freya looked at him. She took in the forearm, the trace, the quality of his stillness, the corridor behind him, with 4 wolves against the wall, and Ren at the far end breathing in the measured way of someone coming down from a held position. She looked at his face. "It is done," he said. She held the door frame. "All lit," she said. "The east wing is clear. Sile has the north road." He paused. "Voss is still at the gate." Voss. He came to negotiate. The ones in the east wing came to take different problems. She was quiet for a moment, processing the field scientist methodology, building the picture from what she had. Voss's argument was about governance, she said, not acquisition. "Yes. And you think he meant it?" "I think he meant the part about the ones who are less reasonable coming regardless," Onyx said. "The rest, we will negotiate in daylight, with witnesses." She nodded once. Then she looked at the corridor again, at the 4 wolves against the wall, still not moving, still carrying in their bodies the specific quality of having encountered something that had exceeded their available framework. "They came for me," she said. "Yes. And they did not know that taking me would not give them what they wanted. No, they did not know." She was quiet. He had expected. He was not sure what he had expected. Fear, perhaps, in its various forms. The particular withdrawal that came when the reality of a thing became undeniable. The recalibration that was natural and honest, when the world had just demonstrated that the category of danger was not theoretical. What she did was look at the wolves against the wall with the expression she used when she was noting something for the record, precise, attending, the field scientist, quality of a person who was going to understand this landscape or die trying. "They will talk," she said. "Yes. What they saw tonight, in the corridor, on the lawn, they will describe it." "Yes. And that becomes the new information moving through the territory." "Yes," he said. "That becomes the information that travels further and faster than what traveled after the clearing." She turned to him. "Good," she said. He looked at her. "I mean it," she said. "The ones who would come regardless need to know what they are coming toward before they make the choice. That is better than them not knowing. She held his gaze. Better for them. Better for, she paused, us. The word landed between them and settled there. Us. Not the field scientist language, not the precise clinical approximation of someone maintaining careful distance from the personal. The word she meant. He looked at her across the doorframe. Come out of the room, he said. She came out of the room. They stood together in the corridor with the 4 wolves against the wall, and Ren at the far end, and the shimmer in Onyx's forearm running its continuous quiet trace beneath the skin. Outside, through the east wing's outer wall, the northern forest held its occupied dark. The 3 vehicles on the north road were still there, Voss still at the gate, waiting for the conversation that daylight would bring. The wolves on the east lawn were on their feet now, retrieving the dignity that the shimmer had temporarily made unavailable to them. The word was moving. He could feel it moving, not literally, not in any sense that could be precisely described, but in the wolf, in the bond, in the depth of the world that the Ethon Velen Locke had given him, and that 4 days of her had deepened past anything he had yet found the bottom of. The word was moving through the northern territory and the western territory and the connected channels of the pack networks, and it was carrying the description that the wolves from the east wing would give when they returned to their home packs. The corridor, the shimmer at full expression, the obsidian wolf with the dark moonlit fur blazing in the narrow space of an old lodge's 3rd floor, filling it not with threat, but with the undeniable weight of something that had found its full form and was standing in it, power without a ceiling. That was the phrase that had moved first after the clearing. This would be different. This would be the phrase that came from wolves who had stood in the corridor, who had felt the ambient reality of it against their skin, who had laid down on the east lawn, not because they were afraid, but because their bodies had known, the way bodies knew things before minds caught up. He did not know what phrase they would find. He knew it would be accurate. He knew it would travel further and settle deeper than anything that had gone before, and then it would do what it was supposed to do, what the goddess's design had always required it to do, the reason the Ethon Velbond existed, the reason the unlock was necessary, the reason the calculation had been building toward this intersection of bloodline and time, and a woman with an unsubsment contract, and a road closure, and a wrong turn. It would tell the wolves of the Northern Territory what the Obsidian Pact now was. Not a warning, not a threat, simply a fact, stated in the goddess's own color, in the language of the body that all wolves understood before they understood anything else. Here is what was always going to happen. Here is what was always going to exist. Here is the door that opened and will not close, and the wolf who walked through it, and the woman who was placed at the intersection precisely, finally, because the calculation was complete. Here is the Moonlit Alpha. Freya stood beside him in the corridor. He was not holding her hand. He was not touching her at all. They were standing near each other in the particular proximity of people who understood that their closeness was the architecture now, not demonstrated, performed, simply the way things were arranged. She looked at his forearm. Still there, she said. Always, he said. She looked at him. The field scientist precision was there, and the choosing, the deliberate quality of eyes that looked because they decided to. Underneath both of those, something that had no clinical name, the thing she had said on the frost-edged path. Terrifying things are worth the most. What happens now, she said. Voss in the morning, he said. The governance conversation, the alliance questions, the structure that prevents this from happening again with wolves who are less interested in conversation. And after that, you are free to choose what you want, with full information, with the Obsidian Pact's protection, in whatever configuration you can tolerate. He looked at her. You are not a pack asset. You are not my property. You are a person who was placed at an intersection by a goddess, with a very long view, and what you do at that intersection is yours to determine. She held his gaze. I have determined it, she said. I know, he said. But you are going to let me say it. Yes, he said. I'm going to let you say it. She turned to face him fully. I want to be where the weight is, she said. I have been looking for weight my entire life, and I have found it, and I am not going to walk away from it, because it is large, and because the world has decided it has opinions about me. She paused. I am choosing toward Onyx, not away from. I want you to have that clearly. He looked at her. I have it clearly, he said. Good, she said. Then let us go deal with Voss. He looked at her for one more moment. The thing that had been traveling in the direction of a smile for 4 days arrived, not a performance of it. Not the almost smile of a man who had closed 12 years of doors and learned to keep even small expressions managed and contained. The real thing, quiet, genuine, belonging entirely to itself without apology. She saw it. Something in her expression answered it. He turned toward the staircase. She fell into step beside him. The shimmer ran its dark moonlit trace through the veins of his forearm, permanent and patient. The color the goddess had chosen across a calculation longer than any of them could see the full shape of. Below them, the lodge held its old bones and its 300 years of gathered events, pressing them carefully into its timber and its stone. Outside, the northern forest stood in its occupied dark, full of things that lived in it and moved through it and were exactly what they were. The moonlit alpha walked down the stairs. The Aethonvel walked beside him. The bond between them was woven now into the fabric of what both of them were. The rest was what came next. The rest was everything. That is the end of this tale. But in the world of the supernatural, there is always another shadow waiting. Thank you for staying with me through every twist, turn, and heartbeat. If you enjoyed the ride, there is more waiting for you. Take a look at the other audiobooks on this channel. Do not forget to subscribe if you want more magic, monsters, and stories that go bump in the night. Until next time, stay curious and brave and never stop listening.